The hand writes the word recovery, and Caden can't figure out where he recognizes this handwriting from. The fingers are slender, stained with ink. The callus on the middle finger is so old it's already turned yellow. This isn't his hand. This isn't his desk. This isn't his life. A second ago, he was sitting in front of a monitor in the Seoul office, editing a 400-page contract for the third day without sleep. And now, before him, is a parchment bearing order number 4471 regarding the tax collection from the village of Holm. The handwriting is beautiful, neat, not his. But his hand keeps writing as if his body remembers what his mind does not. Caden slowly lowers the quill. He looks around. Stone walls, a narrow window, dust in the air glows golden in the dim light. Scrolls line the shelves from floor to ceiling. It smells of old leather and dampness. The archive. He's in the archive. Something clicks in his head. Not a sound. A sensation, as if someone had inserted a key into the lock and turned it. Lines flash before his eyes, white on black. Initiated, editor detected. Class, 3rd rank scribe. Intelligence, 38. Strength, 6. Charisma, 12. Ink of Destiny, 100 out of 100. Caden blinks. The lines don't disappear. He blinks again. The lines fade. But the sensation remains, as if he'd just read the title page of a contract for his own life, and the terms were appalling. Strength 6. 6. For 12 years, he'd worked with lawyers who devoured people at the negotiating table. He'd hunted down a single comma in contracts that would turn the entire document on its head. He'd done it on his 3rd day without sleep, half blind from the monitor's flicker. And now he has power 6. He looked at his hands again, thin, weak. His fingers were long and precise, like a watchmaker's. The hands of a scribe, not a warrior, not a mage, not a hero. A scribe who transcribes tax orders for those who spit in his face. Great. Just great. The door burst open with a crash. Standing in the doorway was a girl of about 17, disheveled, wearing a laundress's apron, holding a basket of wet laundry. Her face flushed from running, her eyes wide open. She screamed that they had come for the money again. Caden didn't know her name. Didn't know who she was, didn't know why she had run in here of all places, but his body knew. Something in his chest tightened so tightly that he stopped breathing for a second. This body loved this girl, loved her desperately, until it hurt in his ribs. And Caden realized one thing immediately, without a second thought, without analyzing it. For her, he would tear this world to shreds. The girl grabbed his sleeve and dragged him toward the door. She spoke quickly and incoherently. The tax collectors, 3 of them. The oldest is Garrett, Baron Volch's son, the very same one who broke her wrist last month. They're standing by the house. They're demanding 30 silver coins for the quarter. They don't have 30 silver coins. They don't even have 10. Caden ran after her down the narrow street, absorbing the information like a contract on first reading. The girl's name came to him on its own. Leah Kern, her sister, the younger one, 17 years old, a laundress. Their house is on the edge of the neighborhood. Their mother had died 3 years ago, their father even earlier. Just the 2 of them, a scribe and a laundress, at the bottom of the food chain. When they reached the courtyard, Caden saw 3 people. 2 soldiers in leather vests stood by the gate, and in the middle, a young nobleman of about 24. Blonde hair, an expensive doublet, knee-high boots, a handsome face, but with an expression that Caden had learned to read instantly during his 12 years in the corporate world. The face of a man who relishes power over those who cannot fight back. Garrett Volch. Garrett saw Leah and smiled, calmly, lazily, like a cat watching a mouse without any particular hunger, just because he can. He said time was up. He said that 30 silver coins was a favor. He said that next time it would be 60. Leah stood in front of Caden. She shielded him with her body, small, slender, with hands wet from doing laundry. She told Garrett they'd pay next week. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. Garrett stepped toward her. Caden watched and counted. 12 years of drafting contracts had taught him one thing. Don't get into a fight you can't win. Find a loophole. There's always a loophole. In even the longest, most convoluted contract, there's a line that no one noticed. A single comma, a single footnote, a single caveat. He reached into his pocket and felt something. Hard, warm, pulsing like a second heart. He couldn't remember when it had gotten there. He pulled his hand out and looked down. A book lay in his pocket. A small one, with a black leather cover. It was warm, and it was calling to him. Garrett nudged Leah. Not hard, casually, like moving a piece of furniture aside. She fell to one knee. The laundry basket tipped over. Wet sheets scattered across the floor. Garrett laughed. One of the soldiers laughed too. Caden looked at Leah, at her hands, red from doing laundry, strong from work. Hands that wrung out heavy laundry for hours every day. Hands that possessed their own strength. It's just that no one considered that strength to be real. He opened the book tucked under his shirt. The pages turned on their own. Then they stopped. Written on the page was Kern Leah, laundress. Strength 4, speed 8, stamina 12, maximum in all categories 15. Notes, blank. For 12 years, Caden hadn't written in the main columns. He wrote in the notes, in the footnotes, in the caveats, in those lines in small print that lawyers skim over because it's just a note. He took a quill from his pocket. He dipped it into the inkwell sitting on the windowsill, and he wrote a single line in the notes column. Hand speed plus 55 when erasing or wringing out laundry in the presence of the offender. The page absorbed the ink. The letters glowed for a moment and then faded. A thought flashed through his mind. The eraser is activated. Duration, 24 hours. Cost, 0 drops of Fate's ink. Trace, 0. Caden closed the book. He looked at Leah. She was getting up from her knees. Her hands were covered in mud. Her eyes were angry. He told her quietly to take the wet sheet. She simply took it and shook it out, as usual, just as she does every day. Leah looked at him as if he were crazy, but she took it. A heavy, wet sheet made of coarse canvas, about 5 kilograms of wet fabric. Garrett stepped toward her again. Leah shook out the sheet. What happened next, Caden remembered frame by frame. The wet fabric whipped through the air so fast it whistled. The edge of the sheet struck Garrett in the face. There was a crack. Blood spurted from his nose. Garrett staggered. Leah didn't stop. Her hands moved of their own accord. She twisted the sheet around his arms, around his body. 2 turns. 3. The wet fabric tightened around him like a straitjacket. Garrett fell. He rolled across the courtyard. The soldiers stood with their mouths agape. They hadn't seen the blow. They'd seen the laundress shake out the laundry, and the Baron's son was lying in the mud with a broken nose, wrapped in a wet sheet. Leah stared at her hands, not understanding, not believing it. A flash crossed Caden's mind. Plus 12 recognition with Leah, plus 6 ink of fate. Trace 0. Garrett got to his feet. He tore himself free of the sheet. His face was white with rage, blood on his lips. He pointed a finger at Leah and hissed that she would regret it, that her father would find out, that their entire family would rot in a debt pit. Then he turned and walked away. The soldiers shuffled after him. Leah turned to Caden. Her hands were shaking. She asked what had happened. Why the sheet? Why so fast? Caden shrugged. He said she was just good at doing laundry. 12 years of drafting contracts. Thanks to you, Seoul Law School. He'd found a loophole in the world's system in a single day. But the day wasn't over yet. When Leah went to hang the laundry out to dry, Caden sat down on the steps of the house and opened the book again. He looked at the pages and realized what he was holding in his hands. This wasn't just a book. It was a registry. Every page was someone's record. Whose life recorded in numbers and categories. He flipped through a few pages. Names, dozens of names, hundreds, each with a set of characteristics: strength, speed, intelligence, charisma, magic, health, endurance. And next to each number was a ceiling, the maximum that person could reach. For most, the ceilings were set at 15 or 20. Servants, laundresses, blacksmiths, peasants. Their lives were limited even before birth. Caden flipped through the pages again and again. He found his page. Kern Caden, third-class scribe. Intelligence 38 out of 40. Strength 6 out of 8. Charisma 12 out of 15. Low caps. Life is mapped out. And then he looked further down, to where everyone else had lines with notes. Family tree, hidden talents, curses. He had a smudge there, a black ink stain, smudged, thick, as if someone had written something there and then smeared it with ink. Didn't erase it, didn't cross it out, smeared it over, hid it. Caden touched the stain with his finger. His finger turned black, and the book trembled in his hands. For a second, it seemed to him that the stain was staring at him. He snapped the book shut, shoved it back into his pocket. His heart was pounding. Not out of fear, it was from excitement. For 12 years he'd been correcting other people's words, other people's contracts, other people's mistakes, but he'd never written his own. Now he had a pen, and a book, and a sister he needed to protect, and a whole world written by someone with a terrible sense of justice. Caden wiped his hands on his pants. The ink stain on his finger wouldn't come off. He looked up at the sky above the neighborhood's rooftops, gray, low. It smelled of rain and manure. On the horizon were the spires of the noble quarter. They glistened. Of course they glistened. Their ceilings were 90 high. Fine. He got up. Time for work. Order number 4471 wouldn't rewrite itself. But tomorrow he'd rewrite something more important. Mornings at the archives began the same way every day. Senior clerk Olmar would tap his ruler on the table at exactly 6 o'clock. Then he'd tap the fingers of anyone who wasn't sitting at their desk. Then he'd hand out the scrolls. Caden sat at his desk in the far corner and copied. Order number 4472, tax collection from the village of Cress. Order number 4473, confiscation of the weaver's family's property for non-payment. Order number 4474, transfer of a plot of land to Baron Volmar Volch. Caden read the orders and kept count. In 3 hours of work, he saw the name Volch 14 times. 14 orders in favor of a single family in a single week. Confiscations, fines, land transfers, all processed through promissory notes, all signed by different officials, but all written in the same handwriting, Olmar's handwriting. Caden recognized this trick. He'd seen it dozens of times at the Seoul office. One person writes, different people sign. It's called diffusion of responsibility. A clever scheme. Dirty, but clever. Olmar walked over to his desk. He looked at the work. He snorted. He said the handwriting was crooked. He said Caden was the most talentless scribe in the archives. He said that if he didn't pick up the pace, he'd be sent to the mines during the body census in 21 days. Then he struck the desk with a ruler right next to his fingers. Not on his fingers, right next to them. It was a warning. Caden nodded. He lowered his head. He continued writing. Olmar left. Caden waited until the senior scribe had turned away. Then he pulled a book from under the desk. He'd hidden it that morning in a drawer beneath a false bottom. The body of the former Caden knew this hiding place. Apparently, the boy had kept something valuable there. Maybe letters from his mother. Maybe coins. Now there lay a book that could rewrite reality. Caden opened Olmar's page. Dren Olmar, senior scribe, first class. Intelligence 61, charisma 34, memory 72, memory ceiling 75. Hidden lines. Caden narrowed his eyes. There was a note there, in small print. Bound by a debt obligation to the House of Volch. Indefinite term. Olmar wasn't just a clerk. He was a Volch clerk, their representative in the archives. Every order that passed through that desk was part of the system, and Caden had been rewriting their documents by hand, 20 orders that morning. He felt sick to his stomach, not because of the content, because of the realization. In Seoul, he'd done the same thing. He'd rewritten contracts that destroyed people, only there it was called legal support, and here, service to the crown. He closed the book, put it away, continued working. But now he memorized every order, every number, every name. 12 years of editing had taught him to spot inconsistencies. He found the first one an hour later. Order 4478, regarding the transfer of the Graham family's house to the Wolves. The basis? A debt of 200 silver. But in Order 4302, which Caden had rewritten 3 days ago, the Graham family's debt was 120 silver. In 3 days, the debt had increased by 80 silver pieces. No explanation, no accrued interest, just a different number. Caden filed this fact away in his mind like a bookmark in a contract. Then he found the second discrepancy, and a third. By lunchtime, he had 7 bookmarks, 7 forgeries in the Wolf family's documents in a single week. He didn't know what to do about it. Not yet, anyway. But he knew that information was also a weapon, especially if you're a scribe. Leah came in at lunchtime. She brought a bowl of porridge and a piece of bread. She set them on the table. She sat down on a stool next to him. She said nothing. Caden ate and watched her. He watched her hands. Yesterday's amendment was still in effect for another 20 hours. A draft. In 4 hours, he'd have to decide, approve it or reject it. Approval would cost 0 drops of fate ink because it was an amendment, not a direct edit, but it would leave the change in place forever. He asked how she was feeling. Leah paused. Then she said her hands felt strange. She said that while doing laundry that morning, the sheet in her hands had moved differently, faster, more precisely, as if her hands knew what to do before her mind did. She said it was scary. Caden nodded. He remembered his life on Earth. When you first feel that your body can do something you haven't taught it, it's scary. Then it becomes a part of you. He approved the clause, mentally, without a pen. He simply thought, accept. A flash went through his mind. Clause approved. Hand speed plus 55 when doing laundry in the presence of the offender. Ink of Destiny 106 out of 100. Bonus for the first affirmation, plus 6. Trace, 0. 106. He started with 100, and now he had 106. The system rewarded the First Amendment. The reserve was small, but for clauses that cost half as much as this, it would be enough for a few moves. Leah finished her half of the bread. She stood up. She said she'd bring dinner that evening. Then she paused at the door. She turned around. She said that Garrett was walking around the neighborhood with a bandaged nose, telling everyone that a horse had kicked him. She smiled, for the first time in a long time. Caden watched her leave and thought, a laundress with a ceiling of 15 and a strength of 4. Doomed, according to her sheet, to do laundry until she's 40 and die of consumption. It's written in her registry, in black and white. But now there's a line in her notes that no one can see. One that doesn't change her contract, doesn't raise her ceiling, doesn't break the rules. It simply clarifies 12 years of contract revisions. A caveat isn't a lie. A caveat is a truth that no one thought to read. After lunch, something happened that Caden hadn't expected. Olmar left the archives. He returned an hour later. With him came a man in a gray cloak, bearing the symbol of the Church of Order on his chest. Not an inquisitor, a junior investigator, an inspector. He surveyed the room. He looked at every scribe. His gaze lingered on Caden. Olmar whispered something in his ear. The inspector nodded. He approached Caden's desk. He asked his name. He asked his rank. He asked what he'd been doing yesterday after work. Caden answered calmly. His name was Kern Caden, rank 3. Yesterday, he'd been walking home. The inspector looked him in the eye. Caden held his gaze. In Seoul, he'd sat across from lawyers who were worth more than this entire archive. This boy in a gray coat didn't scare him. The inspector left, but Caden understood. Olmar had ratted him out. The senior clerk had seen something yesterday. Maybe a book, maybe strange behavior, maybe he'd just sensed something. It didn't matter. He'd ratted him out. Caden waited until evening. When the archive had emptied and Olmar was left alone at his desk, checking the day's records, Caden approached. Olmar looked up. He eyed him with his usual contempt, asked what he wanted. Caden opened the book hidden under his cloak. He found Olmar's page and wrote in the margins, "Memory -30 for 1 hour when he lies about those of a lower rank than himself. Draft, 0 ink of destiny." Caden looked Olmar in the eyes and asked directly, "You told the inspector that I did something strange yesterday." Olmar opened his mouth to answer. Then he froze. His eyes grew cloudy. He tried to say that he'd seen Caden with the book, but instead, gibberish came out of his mouth, fragments of words. He'd forgotten. Right in the middle of a sentence, he forgot what he'd wanted to say. Because what he'd wanted to say was a lie about his junior. He hadn't seen a book. He'd seen something strange and decided it was a book. He'd made it up. He'd embellished it. He'd reported it. And now his own memory had erased that fabrication. Olmar shook his head. He looked at Caden in confusion. He asked why he'd come over. Caden said he wanted to clarify Order 4478. Olmar grumbled that all questions would be addressed tomorrow. Caden nodded and left. A thought flashed through his mind. Draft active, 23 hours until the decision. He'd approve this clause in the morning. A safety net. Olmar wouldn't be able to snitch on him because every time he tried to lie about the junior investigator, his memory would flash back. Not forever, just for an hour. Enough for the tip-off to turn into nonsense. Caden walked home down a dark street, thinking about the investigator. He wasn't an inquisitor, just a junior investigator, a small fry. But he'd arrived quickly, too quickly for a routine tip-off. So someone was already watching. Someone is waiting for something unusual to happen in the archives. Caden quickened his pace. 20 days until the body census. Leia's limit is 15. She's already at her limit. If the officials see her record, they'll demote her to the lowest class. For life. Essentially slavery. Everyone knows that low-tier laundresses are sold to baronial castles, and they never return from there. Caden's own intelligence ceiling is 40. He's at 38. 2 more points and he'll hit the ceiling. At the census, they'll strike him off the clerk's list and send him to the mines. 20 days. 106 drops of fate. 7 forgeries in the Wolf Clan's documents. 1 book that can rewrite reality. And not a single ally except for a 17-year-old laundress with a wet sheet. He made it home. Leah was asleep at the table. A bowl of cold porridge stood nearby. She'd been waiting for him with dinner and had fallen asleep. Caden covered her with a blanket. He sat down beside her. He opened the book and began flipping through the pages. He needed people. Not soldiers, not heroes. People with low ceilings and deep pain. Those whom the system had written off. Those whose records said they were nothing. Because it was precisely in their notes that Caden could write what would turn the rules upside down. On the 3rd day, Caden met a thief. He was walking home from work across the market square. 3 copper coins in one pocket, a book in the other. Merchants were packing up their wares on the stalls. Evening. The crowd was thinning. Caden saw a girl of about 15 standing by the bread stall. Small, thin, dirty hair, clothes made of burlap, patched twice over. She stood there looking at the bread with the kind of expression people have when they watch the sunset before the end of the world. Then her hand darted out, quickly, precisely. The roll vanished from the table. Caden blinked and the roll was already gone. The girl turned and walked away, calmly. She didn't run, she just walked, as if nothing had happened. The vendor noticed 3 seconds later. He yelled. The guards at the corner of the square turned their heads. The girl picked up her pace. A guard ran after her. He was in armor and ran slowly, but the square was small. The girl turned into an alley, a dead end. Caden didn't think. His body moved on its own. He stepped into the alley after her. She was standing against the wall. Her eyes were huge. The loaf of bread was pressed against her chest. The guard was stomping along behind her. Caden turned to face the guard. He said she was his sister. He said he'd pay for the bread. He placed 3 copper coins in the guard's palm. The guard looked at the coins. He looked at Caden, at his ink-stained fingers, at the scribe's patch on his sleeve. He grumbled that next time they'd both be in shackles. He walked away. The girl looked up at Caden. Then she took a bite of the roll. With her mouth full, she said she hadn't asked for help. Caden said he knew. She finished chewing. She wiped her mouth on her sleeve. She said her name was Ivy. Ivy Rowe. She asked why he'd spent his last bit of money on some stranger's thief. Caden sat down on a step in the alley. He said he had some porridge at home. Ivy sat down next to him, 2 steps away, not any closer. She didn't trust him, and she was right. They sat in silence for a minute. Then Ivy said he was a strange clerk. She said that usually clerks yell at thieves louder than the guards do. Caden shrugged. He said that at least thieves were honest about their intentions, unlike those whose orders he transcribed every day. Ivy laughed. Her laugh was loud, unexpected for such a small body. Then she leaned in, and the quill disappeared from Caden's pocket. He saw it. She saw that he had seen it. She froze. Caden reached out his hand. Ivy slowly returned the quill. He took it, and the moment their fingers touched, the book in his pocket grew warm. He opened the book under his cloak. Ivy's page appeared instantly. Row Ivy, Vagabond, Strength 11, Speed 44, Dexterity 67, Luck 3 out of 5, Luck Cap 5. Caden read the line twice. Luck 3 out of 5, Cap 5. For a thief, luck is life. With a luck of 3 and a cap of 5, she's doomed to be caught. Not today, not tomorrow, but definitely by the time she's 18. And in this world, thieves who get caught are hanged. She's 15. She has 3 years, maybe less. Caden looked at the hidden lines and froze. There it was. Lineage, row, collateral branch, connection to, and the rest was blacked out. Not with an ink blot like his, neatly, professionally. Someone had deliberately erased the line about her lineage. Ivy was gnawing on a roll and wasn't looking at him. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know her record had been forged. She didn't know that someone had decided she shouldn't live to see adulthood. Caden wrote in the margin, luck plus 80 when fleeing from someone who fears her more than she fears him. Draft. 0 ink of fate. He closed the book. He looked at Ivy. He said that if she wanted to, she could come to the Kern's house tomorrow. There'd be porridge and a roof over her head, if it rained. Ivy looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she said she'd come, but only for the porridge. And so he wouldn't think she was thanking him. She left. Caden stood up and saw that the quill had disappeared from his pocket again. She'd stolen it a second time. He hadn't even noticed when. Dexterity 67. This girl doesn't need a dexterity bonus. She needs luck. She needs the chance she wasn't given at birth. Caden headed home. In his head, he was counting. 3 copper coins for bread, 1 quill, 1 thief with a luck of 3, and a family tree that someone had erased. Why erase the family tree of a 15-year-old street urchin? Who is she? The next morning, Caden approved Olmar's draft. A thought flashed through his mind. The clauses approved. Memory minus 30 for lying about minors. Ink of fate, 106. Trace, 0. Clauses leave no traces. That's his main advantage. Direct editing costs ink and leaves a trace. A clause costs half as much, or is even free if included in the draft, and leaves no trace. Because, technically, the document hasn't been altered. It's been clarified. Like a footnote in a contract. Fine print. No one reads the fine print. That afternoon, Ivy. She stood at the entrance and pretended she wasn't waiting. Caden came out for lunch. Leah brought 2 bowls of porridge. She saw Ivy. She looked at her brother. Caden said she was an acquaintance. Leah looked at Ivy. Ivy looked at Leah. 2 seconds of silence. Then, Leah silently pulled a 3rd spoon out of her apron pocket, as if she knew. The 3 of them ate on the steps of the archive. Ivy chattered non-stop. She told them that the guard at the western gate sleeps after lunch, that the silk merchant on Crooked Street dilutes his dye with water, that in the basement of the Copper Cat kept contraband for the wolves. Caden listened. Every sentence was information. Every detail was a lead. Ivy knew this city better than the archive scrolls. She knew its underbelly, the basements, the back alleys, the secret stashes. When you're 15 and have no home, you learn the city like your own body. Every alley is a vein. Every rooftop is a rib. After lunch, Ivy left. She promised to come back tomorrow. She called him Inkwell Boss. Leah watched her go and said quietly that the girl hadn't eaten in 3 days. From the way she held her spoon, from the way she licked the bowl, Leah knew. She'd eaten that way herself when her mother died. Caden nodded. That evening, he approved Ivy's clause. Clause approved. Luck plus 80 when fleeing from someone who fears her. Ink of Fate 106. Trace 0. 0 cost. 0 traces. A clause. A note in the contract. Fine print. Now he had a team of 3. A scribe with a strength of 6. A laundress with nimble hands. A thief with luck. Against an entire noble house. Against the Church of Order. Against a system that had decided their lives were worth no more than an ink blot. That night, Caden sat at home and leafed through a book. On the 8th day, a red-haired woman with a sword burst into the archives. It happened at night. Caden had stayed late. He was rewriting orders and, at the same time, copying the wolves' forgeries onto a separate scroll that he hid in a secret compartment under the table. 8 days of work, 12 forgeries. The wolves' system unfolded before him like a poorly drafted contract. The more he read, the more holes he found. In the silence of the archive, he heard footsteps, heavy, fast, unhesitating. The door flew off its hinges. A woman stood in the doorway. Red hair down to her shoulders, chainmail under a traveling cloak, a sword in her right hand, her left hand on the doorframe. Her eyes were green, angry. She was tall, a head taller than Caden, and clearly not from this city. She scanned the archive, the shelves, the scrolls, the dust, and Caden at the table. Then she said she needed money, or scrolls that were worth money, or anything that could be sold within an hour. Caden slowly set down his quill. She was armed. He was not. She was strong. With a strength of 6, he couldn't even lift a training shield. But he could speak, and he could read. He asked calmly why a knight would rob an archive. Usually, merchants or money changers get robbed. There's no gold in an archive, only paper. The woman blinked. Then she laughed. Roughly, briefly. She said she wasn't a knight, that she'd been expelled from the order, that she hadn't eaten in a week, that paper was money too, if you knew who to sell it to. Caden looked at her and saw. The chainmail was good, the Order of the Silver Lion, if he remembered the emblem on the epaulette. The sword was heavy, but she held it easily with one hand. Her body was strong. Her movements were precise. She wasn't a bandit. She was a soldier who'd been cast out. He told her there were 4 silver coins in the desk drawer, a week's pay. She could take them, but if she wanted, he could offer her something better than 4 silver coins. She raised the sword, pointed it at him, said she didn't like riddles. Caden took out a book, opened it, found her page in a second because he'd seen her face and heard the name on her shoulder patch. O'Brien Hazel, a knight in exile. Strength 78, speed 54, stamina 71, intelligence 12 out of 15, intelligence cap 15. Caden read it twice. Strength 78. She's a high-level fighter. Speed 54. Endurance 71. An elite soldier. But intelligence 12 out of 15, with a ceiling of 15. And a note in the reason for expulsion from the order column, intellectual unsuitability, decision of the master of the order confirmed. She was expelled for stupidity. Because a score of 15 in the intelligence column meant she couldn't rise to the rank of officer. She couldn't pass the tactical exam. She couldn't read maps or reports. And the order decided that a knight who couldn't read maps was a liability. Caden knew this story. In the corporate world, he'd seen 10 such people, brilliant specialists who were fired because they didn't fit the formal criteria. They read reports slowly. They couldn't articulate a thought in a meeting. They stumbled through presentations. But they did their jobs better than anyone else. They were written off. They were always written off. He looked at the hidden lines and froze. There was something else there. Reason for actual expulsion. Witness to the meeting between Master Crassus of the Order and Inquisitor Selm. Mind score adjusted from 48 to 15 by order. Her score had been falsified. Her mind score wasn't 12 out of 15. Her true mind score ceiling was 48, maybe higher. Someone had halved her ceiling to create a formal pretext for her dismissal, because she had seen what she wasn't supposed to see. The Master of the Order and Inquisitor, Selm. Selm again. The name came up every time Caden found a forgery. Hazel stood with a sword to his throat. Caden sat at the table with a book on his lap. He wrote quickly. Intelligence plus 60 when defending the one she chose. Not a draft. He wanted a draft, but he didn't have 24 hours. He had 3 seconds because Hazel had raised her sword to strike. He confirmed it. A thought flashed through his mind. Clause confirmed. Intelligence plus 60 when defending the chosen one. Ink of Fate 76. Minus 30. Trace 0. 30 ink. Expensive. A clause on a primary stat with a high modifier, but without a trace. Hazel froze. The sword stopped in midair. She looked at Caden, and her eyes changed. The cloudy ones became clear. The unfocused ones became sharp. She blinked, then again. Then she slowly lowered her sword. She said quietly, "What's going on? Why has everything become so clear? Why can she see a crack in the stone on the wall 30 paces away from her? Why can she hear a rat scurrying in the basement 2 floors below? Why have the thoughts in her head stopped jumbling together and lined up like soldiers at attention?" Caden said that nothing had happened, that she'd always been like this. It was just that someone had written in her file that she was stupid, and she'd believed it. But now she didn't believe it anymore. Hazel stood there, sword in her lowered hand, looking at him. For 24 years, she'd thought there was something wrong with her, that she was broken, that her mind worked slowly, and there was nothing she could do about it. Everyone said so. The instructor in the order said so. The master said so. Her fellow soldiers would twirl a finger against their temples, and she believed them, because of the number, because of the record, because the registry doesn't lie. But now she was thinking clearly. For the first time in her entire life, she laid her sword on the table. She walked over to Caden. She grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, pulled him toward her, and kissed him. Firmly, briefly, like stamping a document. Then she let go. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand. She said they'd continue later, and she walked out of the archive. Caden sat at the table. His lips were burning. A thought flashed through his mind. Plus 25 affection points with Hazel. The 20-point threshold has been crossed. He ran a finger over his lips. 12 years at the Soul Office. Not a single female colleague had ever kissed him. He'd stumbled into a world with a magical registry, and in his very first week, a knight with a strength of 78 had kissed him. This world was definitely better written than those contracts in Soul. He gathered his papers, closed the book, locked the archive, and headed home. Leah was asleep. Ivy was sleeping on the floor next to the door. She came every evening, ate porridge, stole feathers, fell asleep at the threshold, refused to sleep inside, said she needed a quick escape route in case the guards came. Caden covered them both, lay down himself, didn't sleep, counted his resources. 76 units of Fate's ink, 3 clauses approved, 0 traces. Me, Ivy, Hazel. 3 people, a laundress, a thief, a knight, each with her own skill, her own pain, her own reason to hate the system that had written them off. Tomorrow at dawn, Hazel would return. He knew it, not because the book told him so, but because he'd seen her eyes. The eyes of someone who, for the first time in her life, had found someone who didn't think of her as broken. People like that always come back, always. At dawn, the door opened. Hazel stood in the doorway, red-haired, lively. She smelled of the road and iron. Behind her stood a woman, large, silent. Her hands were big and strong, a blacksmith's apron, her hair tucked under a scarf, marks on her hands from working with a hammer. Hazel said this was Clara Hine, the blacksmith's widow. She has a smithy, and food, and a place for everyone, and a son who needs help. Clara looked at Caden, silently, appraisingly. Then she said one word, "Come in." Clara's smithy stood on the edge of the artisan's quarter, an old building made of dark stone. The roof was sagging but sturdy. Inside, the heat from the forge never died down, not even in summer. Clara had been working alone ever since her husband died. She shoed horses, she repaired tools, she made nails. It was hard work for a woman on her own, but she didn't complain. Caden noticed that right away. Clara never complained at all. She silently pointed to the room upstairs. She said they could live there. Then she led him to the back of the house. There was a small room there, a bed, a window. A boy of about 6 was lying on the bed, pale, thin, breathing heavily. His eyes were open but cloudy. Clara said his name was Tobias. She said he'd been sick since birth, that the doctors said there was nothing they could do, that this was his condition. Caden took out a book. He opened it. Hein Tobias, son of a blacksmith, strength 34, stamina 40, health 14 out of 30, health cap 30. Caden looked at the numbers and saw a death sentence, health cap 30. His father had been a blacksmith with a stamina of 95 and a health cap of 30. He burned out at 30. His body had withstood everything except itself, and he passed that on to his son. Tobias inherited his father's strength as a blacksmith and the weakness of his body. With a health cap of 30, the boy wouldn't live past 20. Caden closed the book. He looked at Clara. She was standing by the door watching her son. Her face was calm, but her hands were clenched into fists so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Caden understood. She hadn't brought him here for the room. She could have offered the room to anyone. She'd brought him because Hazel had told her something. Something about a scribe who could do the impossible. And in her desperation, Clara had believed it. Because when your child is dying, you'll believe anything. Caden sat down next to the bed. He opened the book again. A spell wouldn't work here. He'd been thinking about that as he walked down the street. Spells work through conditions. Hand speed plus 55 when erasing. Luck plus 80 when running away. Intelligence plus 60 when defending. A condition ties a skill to an action. But health isn't a skill. It's a physical state. You can't write health plus 40 when breathing, because he's always breathing. The condition has to be specific, tied to an action, to a choice, to a moment. You can't tie health to anything. A direct edit is needed. For the first time, Caden checked his supply. 76 dots of fate. A direct edit to raise the health cap from 30 to 70 would cost 40 dots. He would lose more than half his resource. And a direct edit, unlike a clause, leaves a trace. The first trace, a black line would appear on his wrist, and someone in the registry itself would sense it. He sat there thinking. The boy was breathing heavily. Every breath came with a wheeze. Clara stood by the door and waited. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't beg. She just stood there and waited. Caden thought of Soul. 3 days without sleep. A 400-page contract. The client calls every hour asking if it's ready. And he sits there looking for a single comma. A single mistake in 400 pages. Because if he doesn't find it, people will lose money. Their homes. Their jobs. Their lives. He always found it. And now he'd found a solution. Not a caveat. Not a full direct edit. A middle ground. He raised the health cap from 30 to 60, not to 70, to 60. The cost is 30 ink instead of 40. And then he wrote in a footnote, health recovers by 2 points per day when sleeping in a home where he is loved. A caveat to the direct edit, a 2-step process. The cap was raised via a direct edit. The recovery rate was added via a note. A direct edit costs 30 ink and leaves a trace. A note is free and does not add a trace. Caden approved it. A thought flashed through his mind. Edit approved. Health cap raised from 30 to 60, minus 30 fate ink. Fate ink, 46. Trace, 1 of 7. Attention, first trace recorded. A black line appeared on Caden's wrist, thin, as if drawn with a pen. It didn't hurt. It didn't itch. It just was there, like a mark, like a signature on a document. Tobias sighed from the bed, deeply, for the first time without a whistle. Caden saw his cheeks turn pink. He saw the wrinkle on his forehead smooth out. The boy closed his eyes and fell asleep, peacefully, calmly, like a child. Clara approached. She looked at her son, then at Caden, then at his wrist. She saw the line. Caden hadn't had time to hide it. Clara silently took his hand, pulled his sleeve over his wrist, covered it with her palm, held it for a second, then let go, and went into the kitchen. 10 minutes later, a plate of meat and bread was set before Caden, his first meat in 8 days. A thought flashed through his mind. Plus 25 recognition from Clara. Threshold of 20 passed. Clara's total recognition is 50 out of 100. 50. Instantly, for his son. Caden ate and thought. 46 dots of fate. 1 trail. The first of 7. On the 7th, what sleeps in the basement of the Royal Library. 6 edits until it awakens. Each direct edit brings him closer to something he doesn't understand, and isn't ready to understand. He looked at the line under his sleeve. A thin, black line. The price for a child's life. He'll pay even more if he has to. But first, he needs to save up. He needs those he's rewritten to do good. The ink is replenished when the rewritten ones use their new skills for the benefit of others. Leah, Ivy, Hazel. They must act. They must help. They must protect. Then the ink will return. That evening, the whole team gathered in the smithy. Leah, Ivy, Hazel, Clara, Caden. 5 people at one table. Clara fed everyone. Meat, bread, porridge. Ivy ate so fast that Hazel started counting aloud how many pieces she'd wolf down in a minute. Ivy took offense. She stole a piece of meat from Hazel's plate. Hazel tried to catch her. Ivy dodged her. Leah laughed. Clara shook her head, but the corners of her mouth twitched. Caden sat and watched. 5 people. 2 days ago, he was alone. A clerk with a strength of 6, sitting at a desk in a dusty archive. And now he had a sister with nimble hands. A thief with good luck. A knight with a clear mind. A blacksmith with a warm home. And 14 days until the body census, which would decide their fate. He lifted the bowl of Jolda. Time to make plans. He told them everything. Not about the book. It's too early for that. He told them about the census. About how, in 14 days, the officials would come and check the lists. About how Leah, with a ceiling of 15, would be classified into the lowest tier. About how he himself, with a ceiling of 40, was on the edge. About how the lowest tier meant slavery. The table fell silent. Ivy stopped chewing. Hazel rested her hands on the table. It was heavy, like before a battle. Leah stared at her plate. Clara looked at Caden. He continued. He said there were 2 paths. The first, to run away. Leave the city before the census. Live in the woods. In the mountains. Somewhere beyond the reach of the officials. The second, stay and disrupt the census. Ivy asked how they could disrupt the census. Caden said he didn't know yet. But there's an article in the regulations. Article 47. A scribe may challenge a record to a duel of the pen. He hadn't seen that article yet. He'd heard about it, out of the corner of his ear, in bits and pieces. The archival scrolls hinted at it, but he didn't have the full text. He looked at Hazel and asked if she knew anything about a pen duel. Hazel shook her head. She's a knight. She knows duels with swords, with lances, with fists. A pen duel is for those who can read, and she's only recently begun to realize what she's capable of. Caden nodded. He needed someone from the archives, someone who knew the regulations, someone who remembered every order from the past 40 years, someone with access to the restricted shelves. He didn't yet know who that person was, but he knew that person existed. That night, Caden couldn't sleep. He sat by the cold hearth in the smithy, flipping through a book. He counted the ink. 46. Not enough. He needed action from his people. Action for the good of others. Tomorrow, Leah will go to the market to do laundry for the widows in the neighborhood. For free. Every time she uses her nimble hands to help someone, the ink will return. Ivy will scout the routes of the wolf collectors. If she uses her luck to gather information to protect people, the ink will return. Hazel will guard Leah at the market. If she uses her mind to protect the laundress, the ink will return. The system works for good. The more they help, the stronger Caden becomes. The stronger Caden, the more he can help. A virtuous cycle. A beautiful, virtuous cycle. He wrote down the plan on a scrap of parchment, not in a book, on ordinary parchment, with ordinary ink. Because some things need to be written the human way, without magic, without caveats, without traces. Just a plan from a scribe who wants his people to still be alive in 14 days. In the morning, he was awakened by a knock, loud, insistent. Hazel opened the door. A young messenger stood on the threshold, holding a scroll bearing the royal seal. He unrolled it and read it aloud. To all residents of the city of Astrain, the census of bodies is being rescheduled. The new deadline is in 14 days. By order of Baron Volmar Volch's chancellery, the commission will arrive 1 day earlier than the announced date. All residents are required to submit their registration forms for verification. Failure to comply will be punished by imprisonment in a debtor's prison. The messenger left. Caden stood there with a bowl of porridge in his hand. The census isn't in 21 days. Not in 14 either. Caden found the archivist the next day. Or rather, the archivist found him. He was sitting at a table in the archives, transcribing yet another order, when he felt a gaze. Not a casual one, not a fleeting one, a heavy one, a scrutinizing one, as if someone were reading him like a scroll. He looked up. A young woman was standing in the doorway. She was short. Her dark hair was tied back in a bun. She wore a plain gray dress. In her hands, she held a stack of scrolls pressed against her chest. She was looking at him, not at his face, but at his hands, at his ink-stained fingers, at the callus, at the quill. She was looking the way one looks at text when searching for a mistake. Caden recognized that look. He himself looked that way for 12 years. The girl placed the scroll on the edge of his desk. Silently, she turned and left. Caden picked up the scroll. He unrolled it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, written by hand in neat, small handwriting, were the words, "Regulations for the Body Census, Article 47, Paragraph 3. A scribe holding a valid rank has the right to challenge any sheet submitted to the census by any person through a duel of the pen. A pen duel is a contest in which the challenger and a representative of the chancellery take turns pointing out discrepancies in each other's forms. The party that discovers 3 discrepancies first is declared the winner. The loser's form is subject to on-the-spot review." Caden read it 3 times. A pen duel, not with swords, not with magic, based on knowledge, on accuracy, on the ability to find errors in others' documents. He smiled. 12 years of editing contracts, 400 pages a night, a single comma for the entire document. He was born for this. Not literally, but in terms of skill, definitely. He hid the scroll. That evening, he asked Olmar who the girl with dark hair was. Olmar grumbled that it was Mina, the archivist's daughter. She stays in the restricted storage rooms on the 3rd floor, doesn't talk to anyone. Strange. Caden nodded. Mina. So, he'd heard that name before. The body of the former Caden had heard it. She worked on the 3rd floor, where ordinary clerks were barred from entering. Restricted shelves, old regulations, archives of orders dating back hundreds of years. She had brought him Article 47, silently, without explanation, without asking. She simply placed it on the table and left. So she had been watching him. So she knew what he needed. So she'd been watching him for more than just a day. The next morning, Caden arrived at the archives before anyone else. He went up to the 3rd floor. The door was locked. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. The door opened. Mina stood in the doorway. She looked up at him. She said nothing. Caden thanked her for the scroll. She nodded. He asked why she'd done it. She was silent for 5 seconds. Then she said she'd been watching him for 32 days, ever since his handwriting changed. Caden felt a chill. 32 days. He'd been here for 8. That meant she'd noticed the change even before he'd ended up in this body. No. She'd noticed that his handwriting had been one way and then had become another. 24 days before he'd appeared, the old Caden had already been changing. or something inside him had been changing. Mina said that the old Caden wrote slowly and evenly. The new Caden writes quickly and with a slant to the left. A leftward slant is atypical for trained Australian scribes, she remembered, because she knew by heart the handwriting of every scribe from the past 40 years. Caden looked at her and understood. An IQ of 92, a level of memory he'd never seen before. This girl isn't just an archivist, she's a living library. He took out a book. He wasn't hiding it. He opened it in front of her. Mina looked at the book. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't frightened. She just looked at it, the way one looks at a familiar text. She said quietly that she knew what kind of book it was, that she'd heard about it, that the archives contain references to the original register in 3 sources. All 3 are considered apocryphal, but she had read them, all of them, by heart. Caden turned to her page. Mina, archivist, intelligence 92, memory 97, charisma 18 out of 20, ManhwaCapped 20. He paused, looked at the hidden lines, and froze. ManhwaCapped adjusted. Original cap 74, current 20. Adjustment made by archive director So Jin, her father. Her own father had tampered with her ManhwaCapped, lowered it from 74 to 20. Caden knew why. With a charisma of 20, no one would marry her. She would remain in the archive, with her father, under control, an object, not a person. He looked at Mina. She stood there, waiting, calm, quiet, like a book on a shelf that knows it will never be opened. Caden didn't write a disclaimer. He took the pen and erased it. It was the first time he'd used the erase function. He didn't finish writing it. He didn't clarify it. He erased his father's correction. He reset the ManhwaCapped to the original 74. A thought flashed through his mind. Erasing a forgery. ManhwaCapped restored. 74. Cost. 0 ink of destiny. Trace. 0. Erasing a forgery is not an edit. 0. Free. Erasing someone else's lie does not count as an edit. The book does not distinguish between lies and the truth. It sees the difference between what the book's owner wrote and what someone else wrote. Father wrote the forgery. Caden erased the forgery. The book counted this as a restoration, not a change. Mina flinched, briefly, as if from a prick. Then she slowly raised her hand and touched her face, her cheek, as if checking that her face was still there, that it was real, that it belonged to her. She said one word, quietly, almost a whisper, "Thank you." Then she straightened up, clutched the scrolls tighter, and said she had information about the wolves, about the census, about things Caden didn't know yet. She said the official coming for the census was named Court Damien. He'd been serving the Baron's office for 10 years. His record had been altered by the wolves 3 times, each time in his favor. She knows because she saw the originals of his record in the Forbidden Vault. 3 versions, 3 discrepancies. Caden smiled. A duel of the pen. 3 discrepancies for victory. He already has 3, and that's just from one official. A thought flashed through her mind. Plus 20 acknowledgments from Mina. Total 25 out of 100. She went back to the vault. Caden went downstairs. He sat down at the table. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from excitement. He began to count. 12 days until the census. He has Article 47. There are 3 discrepancies in the official's record. There are 12 forgeries in the Wolf Clan's documents. There's Mina with a memory of 97 who remembers every order from the past 40 years. For the first time since he arrived, Caden felt he could win. Not survive, win. That evening, he gathered his team in the smithy. He laid out the plan. A duel of the pen. He would challenge Leah's census record. To do this, he needed to challenge the official to a contest. Be the first to find 3 discrepancies in his record, and win. Hazel asked what would happen if he lost. Caden said that the loser's form would be reviewed. If he lost, his form would be reviewed. The intelligence ceiling is 40. He's at 38. A review would most likely drop him to the lowest tier, the mines. Ivy whistled. She said the stakes were high. She called him. Then she added that she liked crazy people. Leah was silent. She looked at her brother. Then she said she didn't want him to take risks for her sake. She said that the lowest rank isn't a death sentence. She'll manage. Caden looked at her. He said that just managing isn't living. Clara set some hot bread on the table. She said the plan was good, but the official won't come alone. He'll be accompanied by the wolf guards. And if Caden starts exposing the forgeries in public, the wolves won't allow the duel to reach a conclusion. They'll strike. Caden nodded. That's why he needed an audience. According to the rules, a pen duel takes place in the square, in front of witnesses. The more witnesses there are, the harder it is for the wolves to use force. He needed the whole neighborhood. For the next 12 days, Caden worked. In the morning, in the archives, he copied orders, copying forgeries, compiling inconsistencies. In the afternoons, he prepared for the duel. Every evening at Clara's smithy, the team gathered and rehearsed the plan. Leah walked around the neighborhood, doing laundry for widows and orphans, for free. Her hands moved with incredible speed. People watched. They marveled. They thanked her. Word spread through the neighborhood. Kern's laundress washes like she's under a spell. The ink of fate dripped, 2 or 3 drops for every good deed. Leah saved a child who nearly fell into a well. She grabbed him by his shirt so quickly that no one had time to blink, plus 8 drops of ink. Ivy ran across the rooftops. She gathered information. The wolf guards' patrol routes, shift schedules, names, and connections. Every evening, she brought Caden a small scroll with notes. Caden couldn't read them because Ivy didn't know how to write. She drew pictures, sticks for people, circles for houses, arrows for routes. But the information was accurate. Hazel patrolled the neighborhood, not like a guard, like a knight. The difference is that a guard maintains order, while a knight protects people. She chased away 3 collectors who were harassing an old baker. She didn't fight. She just looked at them. With a wisdom of 72, her gaze was so intense that the collectors decided the baker didn't have to pay today, plus 5 ink. Clara fed everyone. She repaired Hazel's armor. She shoed Leah's horse, which Leah had received from a grateful widow. Tobias got out of bed for the first time in a year. He went out into the yard. He looked up at the sky and said it was blue. Clara began to cry. It was the first time since Caden. Minna brought scrolls every evening, silently. She placed them on the table, then she left. Each scroll contained information, orders, regulations, hidden clauses. She was digging through the archives like an archaeologist, layer by layer. On the 7th day, she brought something special. An original document from official Court Damien, dating back 10 years, from before Volchi's first forgery. Caden compared it to the current version. There weren't 3 discrepancies, not 5, 7. 7 forgeries in a single document. The duel of the pen required 3. He had 7, with room to spare. On the 10th day, something happened he hadn't expected. In the evening, a young boy, a messenger, not bearing the royal seal, but the seal of the Church of Order. The letter was not addressed to Caden. It was addressed to Clara. Clara read it. She turned pale. She handed it to Caden. The letter read, "To Clara, widow of Hein. The Church of Order hereby notifies you that the estate of the late blacksmith Hein Marcus is subject to review in connection with an investigation into the illegal possession of heretical items. Inquisitor Selm will arrive in person to inspect the smithy within 3 days." Inquisitor Selm, in person, at the smithy. Caden looked at Clara. He asked if there was anything in the smithy that might be considered heresy. Clara shook her head. Then she paused. She said there were some of her husband's belongings in the basement. She had never touched them. She didn't know what was there. Marcus had asked her not to go down there. She had promised. And she had kept that promise for 5 years after his death. Caden went down to the basement, a cramped room with mold. The stones were covered in moss. In the corner stood a chest, heavy, made of iron. The lock was broken. Inside, a blacksmith's hammer with an engraving that Caden couldn't read. 3 iron plates with symbols, and an inkwell, small, made of black stone, with a lid on which a symbol was engraved. A quill, the very same quill that had appeared on Leah's wrist after the bond. Caden picked up the inkwell. It was warm, like the book, and heavy, much heavier than it looked. He opened the lid. There was nothing inside. It was empty. But at the bottom, in delicate script, vellum. He didn't know that name. Not yet, anyway. But the book in his pocket had grown so hot it was burning his skin. He went upstairs. He told Clara they needed to hide the chest. Right now, today, before Selm arrived. Hazel took the chest away that night. She carried it to the attic of an abandoned house 3 blocks away. Ivy made sure no one saw. Caden kept the inkwell for himself. He hid it along with the book. 3 days. Inquisitor Selm in 3 days. The census in 12. 2 timers running simultaneously. Caden sat by the cold stove and counted. 68 drops of destiny. Recovered in 10 days thanks to the team's efforts. 1 trail. 5 people rewritten. 6 allies if you count Mine. And 2 enemies moving toward them. The wolves with the census. Selm with the search. 12 years in the corporate world had taught him one thing. When you're under pressure from 2 sides, don't defend yourself. Attack the 3rd side, the one no one expects. Caden picked up a quill, an ordinary one, not from the book, and began writing a plan on parchment. Not a correction, not a disclaimer, just a regular plan. The Inquisitor is looking for heresy in the blacksmith shop. He won't find it, but he'll come. And when he does, Caden will show him something. Not a book, not an inkwell. Forgeries. 12 forgeries by the wolves in the archival orders. The Inquisitor serves the wolves, but the Inquisitor also serves the church. And if the forgeries come to the church's attention, the wolves will have to answer for them. And in answering, the wolves will be distracted from the census. 2 enemies, 1 attack. Pit them against each other. Caden smiled. Samsung's lawyers had been scaring him for 12 years. The Baron and the Inquisitor hadn't learned that trick yet. Inquisitor Selm arrived on the 11th day, not in 3 days as he'd promised, a day early. Caden was already getting used to it. In this world, everyone arrived early when they wanted to catch you off guard. Morning, the blacksmith shop. Clara was kneading dough. Tobias was playing in the yard. He was running for the first time in a year. Not fast, but he was running. His legs were holding up. His cheeks were rosy. Health, 26 out of 60. It's rising by 2 points a day. A home where he's loved. The clause is working. A knock at the gate. Heavy, steady. The knock of a man who has no doubt the gate will be opened for him. Hazel opened it. Standing on the threshold was a man in his 50s. Thin, tall, an elongated face. His eyes were gray and unblinking. He wore gray robes with the symbol of the Church of Order on his chest. Behind him stood 2 assistants in identical gray cloaks. Inquisitor Selm. Caden was seeing him for the first time, but the book in his pocket grew hot instantly. Selm entered. He didn't ask for permission. Inquisitors don't ask. He surveyed the smithy, slowly, carefully, as if reading a document that had been the subject of a complaint. He looked at Clara, at Tobias in the courtyard, at Hazel. He lingered on Hazel. 2 seconds. 3. Then he looked away. He said he had come regarding the estate of the blacksmith Marcus. He said the church had received information about the storage of heretical items. He said the search would take an hour. Clara nodded, silently, calmly. She was prepared. The chest in the basement was empty. Hazel had taken it out a week ago. All that remained in the basement was an empty shelf and 3 sacks of coal. The assistants went downstairs. Selm stayed upstairs. He stood in the middle of the smithy, his hands behind his back, waiting. Caden came out of the back room. He'd been hiding there until Selm entered. Not out of fear. He was waiting for the right moment. Selm saw him, looked at the clerk's insignia on his sleeve, at his ink-stained fingers, at his gaunt face, and said nothing, just stared. Caden stared back. For 12 years, he'd sat across from lawyers who could destroy a man with a single phone call. They looked at him the same way, coldly, appraisingly, as if, at a document, they were deciding whether to sign or tear up. The assistants stood up. They reported that the basement was empty. Coal, a shelf, nothing illegal. Selm nodded, but he didn't leave. He turned to Caden. He asked what a third-class clerk was doing in a widow's blacksmith shop during work hours. Caden replied that he lived there, since recently. Rent. Selm asked since when clerks could afford rent. Caden replied that the rent was paid in labor. He keeps the smithy's books, helps with orders, prepares documents for clients. A clerk with a side job. Nothing unusual. Selm was silent. He watched. 5 seconds. 10. Then he said he'd heard about a scribe from the neighborhood who does strange things. He didn't specify what. Caden said the only strange thing he does is copy orders without making mistakes. Unlike some. Selm tilted his head. A faint smile. Not kind. Not mean. Professional. He said he was leaving, but before that, Caden pulled out a scroll. Not from a book, just an ordinary scroll. On it were copies of 3 orders from among the 12 forgeries by Volcha. He handed the scroll to Selm. He said he'd found it in the archives. Discrepancies in the property transfer documents. 3 orders, 3 different debt amounts for the same family, the same signature, senior scribe Olmar, certifier, Baron Volcha's chancellery. Caden said that as a scribe, he was obligated to report discrepancies in the documents, and he was reporting them to the Inquisitor of the Church of Order, as required by the charter. Selm took the scroll, unrolled it, read it. His expression didn't change. Not a single muscle twitched. Caden watched. Over the past 12 years, he had learned to read lawyers' faces. A motionless face meant shock. Lawyers don't show surprise. They show indifference when they're most surprised. Selm rolled up the scroll. He put it in his cloak pocket. He said the church would consider it. Then he looked at Caden one last time. He said quietly that a scribe who finds errors in other people's documents must be careful, because someone might start looking for errors in his documents too. He left. His assistants followed him. The gates closed. Silence. Hazel exhaled. She said the hairs on her arms were standing on end. Clara sat down on a bench. Her hands were trembling with fear. Ivy peered down from the roof. She'd been sitting up there the whole time, watching the assistants. She said that one of them had turned his head toward the west, toward the baronial quarter. So after the search, they'd go to the wolves, with a report, or with the scroll. Caden nodded. The scroll was a decoy. 3 forgeries out of 12. Not all of them, not the most serious ones, but enough to make Selm think twice. The Inquisitor had been working with the wolves. He'd been covering up their forgeries, certifying fake family trees. But the Inquisitor served the church, and if the church found out that the Inquisitor had been covering up financial fraud, that would be a problem. Not for Caden, for Selm. Caden didn't attack the wolves. He attacked the connection between the wolves and Selm. He forced the Inquisitor to make a choice. Either investigate the forgeries and frame the wolves, or sweep it under the rug and risk someone else finding the remaining 9. 9 forgeries that Caden had kept for himself as insurance. 12 years of contract revisions. Never show all your cards. Show 3. Keep the rest up your sleeve. That evening, Caden sat in the smithy and counted the days. 9 days until the census. Selm would leave to deal with the forgeries. The wolves will be distracted by Selm. Meanwhile, Caden is preparing for a duel of the pen. 2 enemies, 1 attack. They distract each other, and he prepares his 3rd move. Minna arrived that evening. It was her first time in the smithy. Before, she'd bring scrolls to the archives. Now she'd come herself, silently. She placed 5 scrolls on the table, copies of all 5 versions of official Court Damien's report from the past 10 years. Each version was annotated by Minna. Every discrepancy was underlined. 7 forgeries were highlighted in red. 3 additional discrepancies that Caden had missed were highlighted in blue. Dever 6. He had 10 discrepancies for a duel that required 3. He looked at Minna. She was standing by the table. She didn't sit down. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. Even though Clara had already set out the porridge, Caden told her she could sit down. Minna looked at him, then at the chair, then at the others at the table. Liu, Ivy, Hazel, Clara. They were looking at her, waiting. Minna sat down, slowly, carefully, like someone who had forgotten how to do it. Clara slid the bowl toward her. Ivy stole a piece of bread from her. Hazel tapped Ivy on the forehead with her spoon. Leah laughed. Mina sat there. She ate. She said nothing, but the corners of her lips twitched. A thought flashed through Caden's mind. Mina, trust level 25 out of 100. Status, trust. 9 days until the census, 10 trump cards for the duel, 6 allies at one table, 1 inquisitor who's dealing with forgeries instead of hunting down Caden, 1 mark on his wrist, 68 dots of destiny. Caden finished his porridge. It was time. He stood up and said that in 9 days, in the square, he would challenge the census official to a pen duel, and he would win. And when he won, Leah would be free, and he would remain a scribe, and the wolves would lose control of the neighborhood. Hazel slammed her fist on the table. She said she would stand behind him. Ivy said she would be on the roof, and if anyone tried to hit the ink boss in the back, she'd drop a brick on his head. Clara said she'd feed the whole neighborhood on the day of the duel, so people would come. So the square would be full. So the wolves wouldn't dare strike with 100 witnesses watching. Leah looked at her brother. Tico said she believed him. Minna didn't say anything. She just placed another scroll on the table. Caden unfolded it. It was a list of all the officials who had ever conducted the census in this neighborhood. 23 names. Next to each one was a note. Fake, fake, clean, fake, fake. 17 out of 23 had been forged by the wolves. 17 officials in 30 years. The system isn't just broken, it was built to be broken. From the very beginning, Caden rolled up the scroll, put it in his pocket, and realized that the duel of the pen wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The days passed. Caden prepared. In the morning, work in the archives. In the afternoon, rehearsal for the duel. In the evening, strategy in the blacksmith shop. He rehearsed every move like a lawyer before a trial. He spoke them aloud. He wrote them down. He rewrote them. Minna was his sparring partner. She played the role of an official. She asked the questions that Court Damien would ask. She found weaknesses in Caden's arguments. She pointed out errors in his phrasing. With a memory of 97, she remembered every word of every regulation. And every time Caden made a mistake, she said one word. No. No explanations, no hints, just no. And he would correct himself. Hazel was training Leah, not in fighting, not in fencing, in self-control. Leah had to stand in the square in front of the crowd and not flinch. Garrett would be there, the Baron perhaps as well. They would put pressure on her, with words, with glances, with their mere presence. Hazel knew how it worked. In the Order, she'd been under pressure every day. She taught Leah how to breathe, to stand up straight, to look at a point above their heads and not lower her gaze. Ivy worked within her area of expertise, intelligence. She found out that Garrett had been visiting his father every evening for the past few days. Baron Volmar was receiving guests from the Chancellery. Hustle and bustle, nervousness. Caden's scroll, along with the 3 forgeries, had reached its destination. Sel put pressure on the wolves, or at the very least, he asked questions. The Wolches respond. They're distracted, just what we need. On the 4th day of preparations, something unexpected happened. Caden was walking home from work across the market square. Evening, a crowd, and suddenly a scream, a woman's, sharp. Caden quickened his pace. At the edge of the square, by the fountain, stood a girl, young, about 20 years old, in a nice but worn dress, dark hair, glasses with clear lenses perched on the bridge of her nose. 2 men stood beside her, large men, dressed in the wolves' servants' uniforms. One was holding her hand. The other held a scroll. He was reading aloud, a promissory note. The Je family, a debt of 800 silver coins. The term had expired. The Je family's property was to be transferred to the Wolf House, including their daughter, Sion Je, who was to enter service until the debt was repaid. The girl didn't scream. The scream had come earlier. Now she was silent. She stood upright, her chin raised. Her glasses glistened. She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't give in either. She stood like someone who knows they've lost, but refuses to acknowledge it with their body. Caden stopped. He took out a book. He found the page. Je Sion A. Merchant. Intelligence 71. Charisma 68 out of 70. Charisma cap 70. Skills. Trading, negotiation, hidden lines. Mother, Jeyuna, side branch, connection to, and it was smudged out again. Not as roughly as with Ivy, more subtle, more professional, but it's been blacked out. Caden read on. Father, Jeteran, soak merchant. Record corrected. Status, bankrupt for life. Correction made by decision. Name of the certifier, Inquisitor Selm. Again. Selm had bankrupted her father. He'd forged the record. He'd entered the status bankrupt for life, which doesn't exist in the standard registry. Caden knew this trick. In the corporate world, it was called a black mark. You put a mark on a person's credit history and they'll never get a loan. They'll never start a business. They'll never get back on their feet. It's the same thing here, only instead of a credit history, it's an entry in the registry. He approached the crowd. The wolf's servants were dragging Sion by the arm. She was resisting, not physically, with words. She said the debt was inflated, that the receipts stated 500, not 800, that the interest had been charged illegally. She was calculating in her head, quickly, precisely. She rattled off numbers, dates, paragraphs of the commercial code. The servants weren't listening. They didn't care. They had the power and the piece of paper. Caden stepped forward. He spoke loudly so the whole square could hear. He said that a promissory note is valid only if certified by a scribe with a valid rank. Article 12 of the debt code. He asked who had certified the note. The servants stopped. She held up the scroll. At the bottom was a signature. Olmar Dren, senior scribe. Caden nodded. He said that Olmar Dren was under official investigation following a complaint filed with the Church of Order. His signature was temporarily invalid until the investigation was complete. It was a lie. There was no investigation. The complaint Caden had filed via Selma's scroll concerned forgeries, not Olmar personally. But the guards didn't know that, and the crowd didn't know either. The guards exchanged glances. They weren't lawyers. They were muscle. Muscle doesn't argue with legal provisions. They let Siona go. They said they'd return tomorrow with a new certifier. They left. Siona stood in the square. Her glasses had slipped down her nose. Her hands were trembling, but her face was calm. She turned to Caden. She looked at him, appraisingly, like a merchant looking at merchandise he hadn't expected to see. She asked who he was. Caden said he was a clerk, 3rd class. She asked why he had intervened. Caden said he didn't like poorly drafted documents. She didn't smile, but she adjusted her glasses, and that was almost the same thing. Caden opened his book. He wrote a note on Siona's sheet. Charisma plus 50 to negotiation when bargaining for herself or for those who cannot bargain for themselves. Draft. 0 ink. He told Siona that they would come back tomorrow with a new guarantor, with a new receipt, and she would have to negotiate. Not to pay off the debt, to have it revised. She can do the math. She knows the commercial code. She knows the debt is inflated. Let him prove it, out loud, in front of witnesses. Siona looked at him for a long time. Then she said that a 3rd-class clerk shouldn't be giving advice to a merchant with a charisma of 68. Caden replied that a merchant with a charisma of 68 shouldn't just stand there and say nothing when she's being dragged by the arm. She adjusted her glasses again. She said she'd come tomorrow, to the square, with the numbers. And if he turned out to be a charlatan, she would personally make sure his career ended before the census. She left. Caden stood in the square. The crowd was dispersing. A thought flashed through his mind. Plus 15 confessions from Siona. Total 15 out of 100. 15. The beginning. The next day, Siona arrived. The Wolf family's servants as well. A new guarantor. A new receipt. 800 silver. Siona stood before them. She began counting aloud. Initial debt, 500. Interest under the commercial code, 5 per year. Over 3 years, 575. Where did the 800 come from? The difference, 225 silver. An unjustified charge. She spoke calmly, clearly. Each number hit home like a nail. The draftsperson was hard at work. Charisma, plus 50 for negotiations. She wasn't just counting, she was persuading. Her voice grew steadier. Her eyes brighter. Every word hit the mark. The guarantor began to get nervous. He hadn't expected numbers. He'd expected tears, screams, resistance that could be suppressed, but not an accounting report delivered in the square in front of witnesses. The crowd listened. They nodded. Someone began counting along with Siona. Someone shouted that his debt had also been overestimated. The auditor turned pale. He said he would revise the amount. He lowered it to 600. Siona said 575, or the Trade Guild's court. The auditor agreed to 575, and he walked away at a brisk pace. Siona turned to Caden. She said she didn't know what he had done, but whatever it was, she wanted to know more. Caden approved the draft. A thought flashed through his mind. Clause approved. Charisma plus 50 when trading on behalf of oneself and those who cannot. Ink of Destiny 68. Trace 0. He invited Siona to Clara's smithy that evening for dinner. Siona arrived. She saw the team, Leah, Ivy, and Hazel. The day before the census, Caden didn't sleep. He sat in the forge by candlelight, rereading Minna's scrolls for the 20th time. 10 discrepancies in the record of official court Damien. He selected the 5 best ones, 3 main ones, and 2 backup ones. He could prove every discrepancy, not with words, but with documents, copies of the originals, evidence from the archives. Minna had done work that an entire department couldn't have managed in a month. She did it in 12 days, all by herself, silently, without complaints, without questions. In the morning, Clara went to the market. By 10 o'clock, she had fed 30 people, for free. Bread, porridge, meat. She'd been cooking since the night before. When people asked why, she said there would be a spectacle in the square tomorrow. Clerk Kern would challenge the census official to a duel of the pen. Let them come. Let them watch. Let them decide whose side they're on. The rumor spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone knew about it. Ivy confirmed it. She'd been running across the rooftop since morning, eavesdropping on conversations. People were talking about the duel. Some believed it, some laughed, some were afraid. But everyone was planning to come. Hazel was polishing her sword, not for the duel. She was doing it so she could stand behind Caden and look the part, so the wolf guards would think twice before making a move. Leah was silent. All day. Not out of fear. She was gathering herself, inside, like a taut bowstring. That evening, she approached Caden. She said she was ready. She said she wouldn't hide behind his back. She said she would stand beside him and look them in the eye. Caden nodded. Minna was the last to arrive. She placed a scroll on the table, the last one. Caden unrolled it. It wasn't a document. It was a note, written in her handwriting. Official Court Damien will arrive tomorrow at 9 in the morning. He'll be accompanied by 4 wolf guards. Garrett Wolf will be in the crowd. Baron Volmar won't be coming. He's in the Chancellery, dealing with the forgeries. Inquisitor Selm has sent an assistant to observe. Caden reread it. Selm had sent an observer. That meant the scroll had worked. The Inquisitor hadn't just accepted the information. He'd begun to act, and he wanted to see what would happen in the square. A win-win situation. If Caden won, Selm would publicly obtain incriminating evidence against the Wolches. If he loses, Selm will see that the scribe is harmless. In either case, the Inquisitor wins. Caden understood. He wasn't playing against a single opponent. He was playing a game of chess on 3 boards. The Wolves, Selm, and the Registry, and each board had its own rules. Night. The blacksmith shop. Everyone was asleep. Caden sat by the stove, a book in his hands. He flipped through the pages, not looking for anything in particular, just flipping through them. Names, numbers, lives. Thousands of lives recorded in numbers, ceilings, limits, sentences handed down before birth. He paused on Leah's page. Kern Leah, laundress, strength 4, speed 8 plus 55 in the note. endurance 12, ceiling 15, recognition 50 out of 100, bond active, plus 10% to everything when near Caden. Bond. He activated it on the 10th day when Leah's recognition reached 50. She became stronger when near him, not because he rewrote it, but because she believed, and the system counted that belief as a bond. He flipped to his page. A stain. Black. Thick. Just like before. He touched it with his finger. His finger turned black. The book trembled. For a second. For one brief second. Letters appeared beneath the stain. 3 words. He didn't have time to read them. The stain became impenetrable again, but he saw them. 3 words. Short. He closed the book. Lay down. Closed his eyes. 3 words beneath the ink stain. Someone had written his fate and smothered it with ink. Who? Why? What was written there? He fell asleep with these questions and woke up with them as well. Morning. Census day. The square in front of the archives. 9 in the morning. As Yidden stood by the fountain, Leah to his right, Hazel behind him, Ivy on the shoemaker's roof overlooking the entire square, Clara at her table with food, Shiona in the crowd, counting people, Mina in the shadow of the arch, with scrolls. The square was packed, 80 people, maybe 100. The whole neighborhood had come out. Widows, old people, weavers, bakers, laundresses, blacksmiths, those whose records would be checked tomorrow, those who might be struck off the rolls tomorrow. They had come to see the clerk who had promised to disrupt the census. At exactly 9 o'clock, 5 men crossed the square, an official in a chancery robe, 4 guards in the colors of the wolves. The official was short, plump. His face was round, small eyes, soft hands, the hands of a man who had never done physical labor. Courtier Damien. He stood in the center of the square. He unrolled the scroll. He began to read. The Tell Census. By order of the Crown and the office of Baron Volch, all residents of the district are required to submit their records. Ceiling limits will be verified. Rankings will be reviewed. Anyone who has reached their ceiling limit will be moved to a lower rank. He read for a long time, monotonously. The people listened, in silence. Some lowered their heads. Some clenched their fists. Some hugged a child. They knew what was coming. They went through this every 5 years. And every time, someone was sent to the mines, or to the Baron's castle, or simply vanished. The official finished reading. He raised his head. He said he would start by inspecting the Kern family. Clerk Caden Kern and laundress Leah Kern. Of course, he started with them. The Volchi knew it. Damien knew it. Inspect the Kerns first. Show the neighborhood what would happen to those who made a move. Caden stepped forward. He stood facing the official. The square fell silent. He spoke loud and clear. Article 47, Paragraph 3 of the Tell Census Regulations. A scribe holding a valid rank has the right to challenge the entry of any person submitted to the census by means of a pen duel. I challenge Leah Kern's entry. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the birds on the rooftops fell silent. The official, Damien, blinked. He turned pale, then red, then pale again. He hadn't expected this. Article 47 hadn't been applied in this city for 50 years, maybe longer. It existed on paper, in the archives, on a shelf, forgotten, but not repealed. Damien said that Caden had no right. Caden asked under which article. Damien fell silent. He didn't know. He hadn't read the regulations in full. He'd been conducting the censuses for 10 years by the book, on the wolves' orders. He didn't know his own regulations. Caden did. Mina had drilled every paragraph of every article into his head over the course of a month. He quoted 3 subclauses that confirmed his right. Damien licked his lips. He looked at the guards. The guards stood there. They didn't move. This was a legal proceeding, not a fight. You can't settle this with a sword. Damien said, all right, a duel of the pen, by the rules, 1 at a time, 3 discrepancies. Whoever finds the first one wins. He'll start. Damien picked up Leah's sheet. He read it aloud. Leah Kern, laundress, strength 4, speed 8, ceiling 15, ceiling exhausted, subject to demotion to a lower rank. He announced the first discrepancy. Leah Kern is listed as a laundress, but does not hold a license from the Laundry Guild. This means her status is unverified. Discrepancy. Caden nodded. 1-0 in Damien's favor. Technically correct. Leah doesn't have a license, because the license costs 10 silver coins, which she didn't have. Now it was Caden's turn. He picked up the scroll, a copy of Court Damien's original record from 10 years ago. He read it aloud. Court Damien, Chancellery Official, Intelligence 44, 10 years ago. Current record, Intelligence 52. A difference of 8 points over 10 years. With a ceiling of 60, the acceptable growth rate is 1 point per year with active practice. That is, a maximum of 54. But to go from 44 to 52 in 10 years requires a growth rate of 0.8 per year. Acceptable. However, 3 years ago, Damien's record showed an intelligence score of 46. Growth over 7 years, 2 points. And over the last 3 years, growth of 6 points. A sudden jump, without explanation. No documented training, no mentor. A discrepancy, silence. Damien turned pale. The crowd murmured. Caden pulled out a second scroll, a copy of the record from the past 3 years, bearing the archive seal. The original. Mina had found it. Mina remembered. 1-to-1. Damien licked his lips again. He stated the second point. Under the residence column for Leah Kern, the address listed belongs to the Wolf House according to a promissory note. She is living on someone else's territory without permission. Inconsistency. 2-to-1. Caden clenched his teeth. The Wolches were prepared. They knew about the duel, or they had guessed, and they'd slipped the information to Damien. The Kern's house was indeed listed on the Wolches debt registers, one of those 14 orders. Caden picked up the third scroll, his last trump card. He read it aloud. Court of Damien, Section FA, Approval of Official Appointment. The certifier's signature, Senior Clerk Olmar Dren. Date, 8 years ago. But Olmar Dren had only been promoted to Senior Scribe 6 years ago. The signature was affixed by a person who lacked the authority at the time of signing. The certification is invalid. If the certification is invalid, then Damien's appointment is not legitimate. If the appointment is not legitimate, then all the censuses he conducted over the past 8 years are subject to reconsideration. Inconsistency. The square erupted, not with screams, a rumble. That low, heavy rumble when 100 people simultaneously realize they've been deceived. 8 years. Every census, every lowest rank, every person sent to the mines or to the Baron's castle, all illegal, all based on a signature that never existed. 2 and 2. But Caden didn't stop. He pulled out a fourth scroll. He read it aloud. Court Damien, a hidden line on the page. Bound by a financial obligation to House Wolf, the sum of 200 silver annually. The census official received money from the Wolves every year for omitting the right people, for turning a blind eye, for demoting those the Baron pointed out to a lower rank. A discrepancy. 3. No, he'd found 4, with room to spare, because 12 years of editing had taught him one thing. Don't strike until you knock them out. Strike so your opponent can't get back up. Damien was standing, white. His hands were shaking. The scroll with the census fell to the ground. The wolf guards exchanged glances. The crowd buzzed. Someone shouted, "Arrest him!" They meant Damien, not Caden. A thought flashed through his mind. The duel of the pen is over. The winner is Kern Caden. Leah Kern's entry is contested. The census for the Kern family is cancelled, plus 30 Ink of Destiny. Ink of Destiny, 98, plus 50 recognition from Leah. Total, 100 out of 100. The 100 threshold has been crossed. The bond is strengthened. 100. Leah, 100 out of 100. Caden turned to his sister. She was standing next to him, upright. Her eyes were dry. Her hands weren't trembling. She was looking at him, and a mark was appearing on her wrist, slowly, like ink appearing on wet paper. A quill, small, black, like a tattoo. Leah looked at her wrist, then at Caden. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand. She didn't know what it was. But Caden knew. The bond, complete. At level 100, the mark of the quill. She was now more than just rewritten. She was bound to him, and to the book. In her it flashed again. The body census for the quarter has been cancelled. Reason, illegitimacy of the official. All previous decisions are subject to review, plus 40 quarter acknowledgements. Total 50 out of 100. Title, Deputy Scribe. The crowd in the square was chanting, not his name, a word, one word. Defender, defender, defender. Caden stood in the square and listened. 80 people he had never seen before were shouting that word, for him, on his behalf, because he had done what no one had done in 50 years. He had struck the system with its own tool, a pen, paper, a paragraph. At the edge of the square, in the shadow of the arch, stood a man in a gray cloak, the Inquisitor's assistant. He watched. He took note, and in an hour, his note would land on Selma's desk. And on the other side of the square, Garrett Wolch stood with his nose bandaged, white with rage. His hands were clenched into fists. He looked at Caden, and Caden saw not anger in his eyes, fear. For the first time, Garrett was afraid of the scribe. The evening after the duel, Clara's smithy, the table was set. Meat, bread, even wine that Shiona had brought from her old reserves. 7 people at the table. 8, if you counted Tobias, who was sitting on his mother's lap and eating bread with both hands. Health 38 out of 60, rising every day. Hazel drank wine and recounted how the wolf guards had sweated when the crowd began to roar. She stood behind Caden and watched them. With an intelligence of 72, she could read their faces like open books. 1 wanted to run. 2 didn't understand what was happening. The 4th was gripping the hilt of his sword but didn't draw it, because 100 people were watching. Ivy was sitting on the windowsill. She was swinging her legs. She was nibbling on an apple she'd stolen from Shiona. She was telling them that from the cobbler's roof, she'd seen Garrett leave the square and sit down on the steps of the tavern. He sat there for 10 minutes. He didn't move. Then he stood up and walked toward his father. At a brisk pace. Shiona was counting. She was always counting. She said that if all previous censuses in the quarter were illegitimate, then, according to the commercial code, all property confiscations over the past 8 years were also subject to review. This meant that the wolves could lose more than just control of the quarter. They could lose their very property, land, houses, receipts, everything. Mina was silent. She ate her porridge. She listened. From time to time, she corrected Shiona on the dates, quietly, precisely. Shiona would fall silent each time, check the figures in her head, and nod. They were beginning to work together, Shiona's numbers and Mina's memory. Caden watched as the mechanism took shape. Not an army, not a squad, a workshop. Everyone in their place, everyone doing what they do best. Leah sat next to him, silently. She looked at her wrist, at the mark of the pen. She touched it with her finger. It hadn't faded. It didn't hurt. It just was there, like a birthmark that hadn't been there before. She turned to Caden and said quietly that she needed to tell him something. Caden nodded. Leah said she could see the book. She always could, even when it was in his pocket, even when he left the house. She could see it, feel it, like the warmth from the stove behind the wall. She said it hadn't started yesterday, not after the duel, not after the first slip of the tongue. It had always been there, since childhood. She saw something in the air around people, not an aura, not a glow, lines, numbers. They flashed by too quickly to read, but she knew they were there. She never told anyone, because a laundress isn't supposed to see what only the keepers see. Caden listened. Everything inside him grew cold. Not from fear, from understanding. Leah sees the register, without the book, without a pen, with her own eyes. She'd seen it her whole life and kept quiet, because the world told her she was a laundress, that her ceiling was 15, that she was nothing, and she believed it, and hid the one thing that made her special. He opened the book. found Leah's page, and looked at the hidden lines, the ones he'd seen on the first day but hadn't read carefully. Now he read them. Kern Leah, origin. Abandoned with the Kern family as an infant. Biological parents, unknown. Hidden class, child of the guardian. Heir to the feather. Status, blacked out. Child of the guardian, heir to the feather, blacked out. Just like his own line, with a black mark. Someone had blacked out hers, too, and his, by the same hand. Caden closed the book. He looked at Leah. She wasn't his sister, not by blood. She had been left with the Kern family. She was the child of someone the registry calls the keeper, and she could see the pages without the book. He didn't tell her, not now, not today. Today she deserved one evening without any new upheavals. He put his hand on her shoulder. He said they'd figure it out, together, later. Leah nodded. She went back to the table. Ivy immediately stole a piece of bread from her. Leah gave her a light tap on the back of the head. Ivy giggled. Hazel poured some wine for Clara. Clara shook her head, but took it. Siona was discussing something with Minet, quietly, their heads bent over a scroll. Caden watched them and thought. 6 women, a laundress, a thief, a knight, a blacksmith, a merchant, an archivist. A month ago, he had been alone, a scribe at a desk in a dusty archive, strength 6, ceiling 40, a nobody on paper. And now the quarter calls him the defender. And in this smithy, 6 people whom the world had written off sit at a single table and plan how to overturn the system. Ink of Destiny 98, 1 trace, 5 caveats, 1 direct edit, 6 rewrites. Not a bad result for a month's work, but Caden knew this was only the beginning. The wolves won't stop. The census has been cancelled, but Baron Volmar isn't the kind of man to swallow defeat. He'll strike back, harder, more ruthlessly. Maybe not by himself, maybe through Selm, maybe through someone Caden hasn't seen yet. And Selm, the Inquisitor, saw everything through his assistant. He knows Caden uncovered the forgeries. He knows the crowd is on the scribe's side. He knows the system has cracked. Selm spent 20 years building this system, falsifying records, selling quotas, erasing family. He won't back down. Caden stood up from the table. He stepped out into the courtyard. Night, stars. The air smelled of coal and bread. He looked at his wrist, the black line of the first trace, thin, like a thread. 6 traces until awakening. 6 direct corrections before someone in the basement of the Royal Library opens their eyes. Someone known to the book in Caden's pocket. Someone whose name is engraved on the inkwell from Clara's basement. Vellum. Caden took out the inkwell, a small one, made of black stone, warm. He opened the lid, empty, just as before, but the letters at the bottom had grown brighter, or so it seemed to him. He closed the lid, put it away, returned to the smithy, sat down at the table, and said they needed to think ahead. The census was cancelled, all right, but a quarter isn't a city, and a city isn't a kingdom. The wolves control more than just their quarter. They control half the trade routes through the barony. They control the IOUs of hundreds of families. They control the officials, the guards, and part of the church. We've recaptured 1 quarter, but the Baron will strike again. Maybe not here, maybe at another neighborhood, at other families. The ones who don't have a scribe with a book. Siona nodded. She said that to fight the wolves systematically, we need a base, not a blacksmith shop, a workshop, an official one, with a license, with a sign, a place where people can come with documents and get help, not magical help, legal help, clerical help. Caden looked at her. Siona adjusted her glasses. She said she had a key to the Merchants Guild, a family heirloom, hereditary. It couldn't be taken away, not even with a promissory note. With this key, she could open a workshop on guild grounds, where the Baron had no direct jurisdiction. She pulled the key from behind the collar of her dress, small, bronze, on a thin chain. She placed it on the table in front of Caden. A thought flashed through his mind. Plus 20 recognition with Siona, total 45 out of 100. Siona handed over the family key to the Merchants Guild. Caden took the key, heavy for its size, like an inkwell from the basement, like a book in his pocket. In this world, important things are always heavier than they look. He said they would open a workshop tomorrow. It would be called Kern's Petition Workshop, officially. Editing petitions for commoners, help with paperwork, filing complaints. In practice, a foundation for everything else. Hazel slapped her palm on the table. She said she liked it. Ivy asked if there would be a sign. Caden said there would be. Ivy said she'd draw it. Then she added that she wasn't good at drawing. Clara said she'd make a sign out of iron. Mina nodded silently. Leah looked at her brother. She asked quietly what would happen next. Caden looked at her, at the feather on her wrist, at the book in his pocket, at the trails line beneath his sleeve, at the 6 faces around the table. He said that from now on, they would stop defending themselves, and they would start rewriting the rules. Outside the forge, the wind was blowing. Somewhere to the east, beyond the horizon, the rift was burning. Somewhere in the capital, in the basement of the library, an old man whom no one remembered was sleeping. Somewhere in the chancellery, Baron Volmar was reading a report on the duel of the pen and snapping the pen in his hand in a fit of rage. And somewhere in the shadows amid all this, Inquisitor Selm sat at a table, staring at a scroll containing 3 forgeries. And he was thinking, not about the forgeries, about the scribe with a strength of 6, who in a single month had accomplished what not a single knight could in 10 years. And for the first time in 20 years, Selm didn't know what to do, because he knew how to wield a sword, he knew how to pray, he knew how to forge. But against a man who struck with paragraphs, he had no weapon. Not yet, anyway. The workshop opened 3 days after the duel. A small space on the grounds of the Merchants' Guild. 2 rooms, a table, shelves, an iron sign that Clara had forged overnight. Kern's Petition Workshop. Ivy drew a quill on the sign. It was crooked but recognizable. 4 people came on the first day. An old baker complaining about an excessive tax, a weaver's widow with a forged IOU, a mother of 3 asking to have her eldest son's record reviewed. He'd been registered as a day laborer at birth, even though his father was a carpenter, and a boy of about 12 who just wanted to see the deputy clerk. Caden was working, not with a book, with a quill, with paper, with paragraphs. He was drafting complaints, finding discrepancies, writing petitions to the office. Every document was flawless. Every phrase was precise. 12 years of editing contracts. Not a single extra letter. Shona sat at the second desk. She was counting. Every receipt that clients brought in passed through her hands. She found inflated interest rates, fictitious amounts, non-existent penalties. Her charisma plus 50 bonus for negotiations worked even at her desk. People listened to her numbers and believed her, because numbers don't lie. Mina brought records from the archives, every evening, silently. Original documents, old orders, regulations that no one remembered. She dug deeper and deeper, and with every scroll the House of Wolves cracked another centimeter. On the second day, 12 people came. On the third, 20. By the 5th, there was a line. The neighborhood brought its troubles to the clerk. Fake receipts, stolen land, underreported incomes on children's forms. Caden worked 14-hour days. He didn't complain. This was familiar. His 3rd sleepless night in the Seoul office. Only now, instead of Samsung contracts, he was editing people's lives. And it made sense. For the first time in both his lives, his work had meaning. The ink of fate was growing. Every time Leah helped clients, every time Hazel chased away the debt collectors, when Ivy brought information, when Shiona won an argument with a creditor, the system was working. Goodness generated resources. Resources generated the opportunity to do more good. By the end of the 2nd week, the ink had reached 140, more than the starting 100. Caden felt strength. Not physical strength, the kind that comes when you know that every move you make is the right one. On 15th day, Garrett came to the workshop, not alone, with 10 guards, fully armed. It was morning. The workshop was still closed. Caden was inside alone, preparing documents. The door burst open. Garrett entered. His nose had healed. but it was crooked, a scar from Leah's bedsheet. He would never forgive her for that. He said the workshop was closed by order of the Baron. Illegal activity, incitement, insult to noble dignity. Caden asked where the closure order was. Garrett placed the scroll on the table. Caden read it. Signed by Baron Volmar, sealed by the Chancellery. Grounds. Article 31 of the Commercial Code. Illegal legal practice by a person without the appropriate rank. Formally correct, Caden is a third-rank scribe. To practice law, one needs first rank. But the workshop is not registered as a law office. It's registered as a petition office. The difference is one word, one clause in the guild charter. Paragraph 4, subparagraph B. Petitioning activities are permitted for scribes of any rank, provided they possess a guild key. Caden placed Siona's key on the table next to the scroll. He said that the workshop was legitimate, that the Baron could appeal to the commercial court, that until the court's decision, the closure was illegal. Garrett flushed. He hadn't come to argue about paragraphs. He had come to cause trouble. He nodded to the guards. 2 of them stepped forward. They reached for the shelves. Caden opened the book under the table, not to make corrections, to read. He read the first guard's file. Power ceiling, 45. Current, 42. Wife, 2 children, lives in the blacksmith's quarter, owes the wolves 30 silver. Caden looked up, met the guard's gaze, called him by name. He said he knew where he lived, that he knew about his debt, and that a petition to have that debt reviewed was sitting in the workshop, third in line. If the workshop closed, the petition would disappear. The guard froze. His hand was still in the air. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Caden. He stepped back. Garrett began, not literally, but the sound was similar. He stepped toward Caden on his own. He grabbed him by the collar, lifted him up. Caden hung in his hand. Strength 6 against strength 52, like a child in an adult's hand. Garrett hissed that he'd crush him, that no regulations would save him, that the clerk had forgotten his place. The door opened. Hazel. Behind her, Clara. Behind Clara came Leah. Hazel didn't draw her sword. She simply stood there, arms crossed. Intelligence 72. She looked at the 10 guards and saw each one, their weaknesses, their fears, their pressure points. She said quietly and calmly that if Garrett didn't let the scribe go in 3 seconds, she would tell the entire square why he'd been expelled from the Knight Academy at 14. Garrett turned his head. He looked at Hazel Zell. He turned pale. He let go of Caden. Caden collapsed into a chair. He rubbed his neck. Garrett turned and walked away. The guards followed him. The last one glanced back at Caden. He nodded, barely noticeably. Thank you for the favor. When they were gone, Caden sat down and exhaled. Hazel asked how he was. Caden said his neck hurt and that Garrett had sweaty palms. Hazel snorted. Leah sat down next to him. Silently, she took his hand. She held it. She didn't let go. Clara went to the kitchen. 5 minutes later, a cup of hot tea was sitting in front of Caden. He drank and thought. Garrett had come in person. That meant the Baron had sent his son, not his men. Why? To check. To test the waters. To take a closer look at the scribe. Baron Volmar isn't a fool. He wouldn't physically raid the workshop. That would draw attention. Instead, he'd strike where Caden least expected it, and Caden didn't know where. That evening, Minhwa arrived, not with scrolls, with news. She said her father had summoned her, for the first time in 6 months. He said he knew about the workshop. He knew about the scribe Kern, and he ordered her to cut off all contact. Minhwa said her father wasn't angry. He was frightened. His hands were shaking as he spoke. He isn't afraid of Caden. He's afraid of someone else. Someone higher up than the Baron and the Inquisitor. Someone from the capital. Caden listened. Someone from the capital. Someone even the head of the Royal Archives feared. He looked at the inkwell in his pocket. Vellum. A name he didn't understand yet, but he would soon. The wolves' strike came a week later. Not at the workshop. At Leah. Morning. The market. Leah was doing laundry for the widows. 3 baskets of laundry. Her hands moved quickly, as usual. People all around. Children, old people. Just another day. Garrett appeared from around the corner. not alone. 4 others were with him, not guards, mercenaries. No coats of arms, no insignia, people who didn't exist on paper. He approached Leah, stopped 3 steps away, and said loudly enough for the whole market to hear that Leah Kern was accused of using forbidden magic, that she had been seen repeatedly in the market square performing feats beyond her speed limit, that the speed limit was 8, yet she moved faster than any apprentice, that this was heresy, and that the Church of Order had been notified. The crowd fell silent. Heresy. A word that carries more weight in Astron than a death sentence. Heresy means the stake. Leah stood there. Her hands were wet. She wore a laundress's apron. Her face was pale but calm. Hazel had taught her. Breathe. Stand up straight. Don't look down. She didn't look down. Caden was in the workshop when Ivy flew through the window, literally, through a 2nd-story window. She landed on the table, knocked over the inkwell. Gasping for breath, she said 3 words: Leah, the market, Garrett. Caden ran across the block, 3 streets, 2 alleys. He made it in 4 minutes. When he reached the square, a crowd had already formed a ring. Leah was in the center. Garrett stood before her. 4 mercenaries flanked them. Garrett was speaking, reading out the charges, loudly, dramatically. He was savoring every word. He'd been waiting for this moment ever since the laundress had broken his nose with a wet sheet. Caden pushed his way through the crowd. He stood next to Leah. Garrett saw him. He smiled. Caden didn't panic. An editor doesn't panic. An editor looks for mistakes. He asked to read Leah's sheet aloud, officially, in front of witnesses. Garrett wasn't expecting it, but he agreed. He pulled out a copy of the sheet. He read it aloud. Kern Leah, laundress, strength 4, speed 8, ceiling 15, notes, blank. Because the caveat isn't in the speed column, it's in the notes. And the notes aren't read aloud during a public review. They aren't even visible to a standard sheet reader. Only the guardians can see it, and the owners of the original book. Caden turned to the crowd. He said loudly, "The sheet is clean. Speed 8, cap 15, not a single violation. Where's the heresy?" Garrett clenched his teeth. He said that witnesses had seen the laundress moving faster than the cap. Caden asked which witnesses. Garrett looked around. Mercenaries. But mercenaries without coats of arms cannot testify under the church code. Article 19. Testimony is accepted only from citizens with verified status. Caden knew the article. Minna had implanted it in his mind a week ago, just in case. The case had arrived. Garrett turned crimson. He didn't know that article, just as he didn't know Article 47 of the census. The wolves were used to winning by force, not by the letter of the law. And every time they lost to the scribe, because the scribe knew the letters better. But Garrett didn't stop. He stepped toward Leah. He raised his hand, and he struck. The nobleman's fist slammed into her face. Leah fell into the mud. The crowd gasped. Caden saw it and couldn't move. Force 6. His body froze. His hands trembled. The quill in his pocket. He was what they had made him, a clerk, a scribe, ink instead of blood. Garrett stepped on her hand with his boot. There was a crunch, not bone, ice on a puddle, but the sound was similar. Leah let out a cry, and then Caden saw it. The pin on Leah's wrist glowed, not brightly, dimly, like a dying candle. And the book in his pocket grew so hot it burned through the fabric. He pulled it out, opened it. The page burned with letters, new ones that hadn't been there before. Hidden class activated, heir to the pin, ability, reading. Leah raised her head. She looked at Garrett, and she spoke softly, so softly that only those standing nearby could hear her. She said she could see his page. Right now, without the book. She could see every line. She could see the forgery in his family tree. She could see that his title was fake. She could see that his true class wasn't second-rank knight, but a bastard son with no right to inheritance. Garrett pulled his foot back, as if he'd stepped on something hot. The crowd didn't hear it, but he did, and he turned so pale that the freckles on his nose became visible like ink dots on parchment. He took a step back. The mercenaries moved toward Leah. Hazel stepped forward. She didn't draw her sword. She simply placed her hand on the hilt. The 4 mercenaries looked at her, at the knight with a strength of 78 and an intelligence of 72, who regarded them as a problem that could be solved in 4 ways, all 4 ending the same. The mercenaries stopped. Garrett turned and walked away, quickly, almost running. Caden helped Leah to her feet. Her face was covered in mud. Her cheek was red from the blow, but her eyes were ablaze. She said quietly that she could see everything. Every person in the square, their lines, their numbers, their ceilings, their pain, everything. Caden embraced her, pulled her close, tightly. The crowd was silent. Then someone clapped. 1 person, then a second, then 10, then the whole square. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't see the letters. They didn't hear Leah's words. But they saw the laundress fall into the mud and get back up. They saw the scribe embrace his sister. They saw the nobleman run away. And that was enough. A thought flashed through his mind. Plus 12 ink of destiny. Total 152. Neighborhood approval. 70 out of 100. Caden led Leah into the workshop. He washed her cheek. He checked his arm. It wasn't broken, just a bruise. Leah sat on a chair and stared at the wall. Not at the wall, through it. She could see the lines of people behind the wall, on the street, in the neighboring houses. She could see the entire neighborhood like an open book. Caden understood what had changed. A level 100 bond had unlocked her hidden class, the heiress of the pen. She doesn't just see the registry, she reads it, without a book, without a pen, with her eyes. This makes her the most dangerous person in the city, more dangerous than Caden, because Caden can only read the pages through a book, but Leah sees them directly. If Selm finds out, he won't send an assistant, he'll come himself, with fire. Caden looked at his sister, at the quill on her wrist, at his own mark beneath his sleeve. They were both marked, both connected to something greater than themselves, to the register, to the keepers, to the ink stain that hides the truth. He needed answers, and the answers lay in one place, in the capital, in the royal library, in the basement, where the one called Vellum sleeps. Baron Volmar came himself, not through his son, not through the guards, in person. 3 days after the incident at the market, evening, the workshop is closed. Caden is alone, sorting through documents. The door opened without a knock. A 51-year-old man, burly, graying temples, an expensive raincoat, thin leather gloves, an intelligent face, not like Garrett's, truly intelligent. His eyes were calm, steely, the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years managing people and documents and saw no difference between them. Baron Volmar Volch. He sat down across from Caden, without being invited. He placed a wallet on the table, a heavy one. He said 10,000 gold pieces. He said that Caden would be his scribe, his personal one. He said the workshop would remain. It would even expand, but it would work for the Volch. Caden stared at the wallet. 10,000 gold pieces. The Kerr family hadn't seen such a sum in 10 generations. With that money, you could buy a house, a neighborhood, a life. The Baron waited, patiently. He was used to people thinking when they saw so much gold. Caden placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him. He picked up a quill and wrote a single line. I don't write for those who break laundresses' arms. I transcribe those who do. The Baron read it. He looked up. There was no malice in his eyes. There was disappointment. The disappointment of a professional who had offered a reasonable deal and received a refusal from someone he considered reasonable. He stood up. He grabbed his wallet. He said that Caden would regret it, not as a threat, as a fact, like a figure in a report. Then he left. Caden sat there, staring at the line he'd written, a pretentious phrase, just one on the page. He'd promised himself, and there it was. He could have phrased it more elegantly. He could have kept quiet. He could have taken the money, 10,000 gold pieces. With that, Leah could have lived comfortably for the rest of her days. But he wrote what he wrote. Because there are lines that cannot be rewritten, even if you're an editor. 2 days later, the Baron struck. Not physically, bureaucratically. Orders spread throughout the city. New taxes on the artisan quarter tripled. IOUs that had lain dormant for years suddenly came to life. Collectors went from house to house, not alone, in groups of 3, with guards. In just 1 week, 12 families received notices of confiscation. The Baron wasn't targeting Caden. He was targeting the quarter, the people who came to the workshop, those who clapped in the square. The message was simple. You supported the scribe. Here's the price. Caden worked, day and night. He wrote petitions. He challenged orders. He found inconsistencies. Shiona counted and found overcharges in every other receipt. Min-Ah retrieved the originals from the archives. Hazel protected families from the collectors. Ivy monitored the routes. Leah read the collectors' lists and found their weaknesses. But there were 7 of them, and dozens of orders. And behind each one stood money and power and a 30-year-old system that a single clerk couldn't dismantle in a month. On the 10th day of the siege, Caden lost 3 families. They were confiscated, taken away to the mines. He didn't make it in time. The petitions got stuck in the bureaucracy. The officials refused. The regulations worked both ways. The wolves knew the law too. Caden sat in his workshop at night, alone. Ink of Destiny 152, a single trace. Resources are available, but resources without power are just numbers. He needed something more. Something that would strike, not at Garrett, not at the Baron, at the entire system. He opened the book, found the page on Baron Volmar. He read it. Volch Volmar, Baron, Strength 60, Intelligence 58, Charisma 71, Charisma Cap 75. Hidden lines, IOUs, totaling 4,400 gold, 12 forgeries in his family tree, connection to Inquisitor Selm, financial obligations to the Church of Order. Caden read the last line twice. Financial obligations to the Church. The Baron paid the Church, not the other way around. Selm wasn't covering for the Wolches out of friendship. He was covering for them for money. And if the money stopped coming in, Caden picked up a quill, not from the book, an ordinary quill, and he wrote a clause on the Baron's sheet. Charisma, -40 when giving an order that causes harm to someone weaker than him. Cost, 20 ink. Clause, no trace, approved. A thought flashed through his mind. Clause approved. Ink of Destiny, 132. Trace, 0. Baron Volmar woke up the next morning and discovered he could no longer give orders. Not physically. He could speak. He could utter words. But when he ordered the collector to go to the baker's family, his voice lost its power. The words sounded hollow, unconvincing, as if he himself didn't believe what he was saying. Because every time he gave an order that harmed someone weaker than him, his charisma dropped from 71 to 31. And a person with a charisma of 31 cannot command. The collectors listened but did not hear. The guards nodded but didn't carry out the orders. The officials took the papers and put them in a drawer at the far end. Within 3 days, the wolf's system began to crumble. Not because the Baron had grown weak, because his strength had always been in his words, in his orders, in his charisma of 71, which compelled people to obey. But now his words didn't work, not when they were directed at those weaker than him. A thought flashed through his mind. +15 ink of destiny. Neighborhood approval rating, 80 out of 100. The Baron understood. Not right away. A week later, he realized that something had changed. Not in the people, in him. He summoned Selm, and for the first time in 30 years, he asked for help. He didn't order it, he asked, because he could no longer give orders. Selm came at night, not to the forge, not to the workshop, to the archives. Caden was there, alone, late in the evening. He was copying the latest documents for petitions. A candle on the table, silence, footsteps. Slow, steady. the footsteps of a man in no hurry because he knows his prey is already in the cage. Selm sat down across from him. He took off his gloves, placed them on the table. His hands were old, veiny, ink stains on his fingers. Caden noticed. The Inquisitor had worked with ink too, 20 years in business. For 20 years he had been rewriting the records of commoners at the behest of the nobility. He altered lineages. He erased family trees. He turned people into slaves with a single line. Selm spoke, quietly, calmly, like a priest during confession. He said he knows about the book. He doesn't suspect it, he knows it. He senses a ripple every time Caden makes a direct edit. He sensed the first trace when Caden rewrote Tobias. He sensed it when Leah activated the hidden class. He senses everything, because he too is connected to the registry, not as a keeper, as a servant of the keeper. Caden listened. He didn't interrupt. Selm continued. He said that 20 years ago, a man had found him, an old man, quiet, in a black cloak. The old man said that the registry needed protection, that commoners with high ceilings were dangerous, that the system must remain stable. The old man gave Selm a gift, the ability to sense a disturbance, to see when someone tampered with the register. And Selm served him for 20 years. He forged pages. He kept people in line. He protected the system. Caden asked the old man's name. Selm said, Vellum. Caden grew cold. The ink well in his pocket turned to ice. Vellum. Archon Vellum. The first keeper. The one who wrote the first page of the register. The one who lost the original book 300 years ago. The one whose name is engraved on the inkwell from Clara's basement. The one who sleeps in the basement of the Royal Library. Selm had 15 years working for Vellum. He forged documents on his orders, not on the Volchi's orders, on the Keeper's orders. The Volchi were a tool. The nobility was a cover. Vellum was behind it all. Selm said he hadn't come to arrest anyone. He'd come to warn him. Caden had 6 traces left before the awakening. One was already gone. Every direct correction brought the moment closer. And when Vellum awoke, he would take the book. Because the book was his. It had been his 300 years ago, and it would be his again. Caden asked why Selm was warning him. Selm paused. Then he said he had a granddaughter, one he'd never seen, one who didn't know he was her grandfather, one who was sitting right now in the smithy, crunching numbers for the scribe's workshop. Siona G., the granddaughter of Inquisitor Selm. Caden closed his eyes. He opened them. The world hadn't gotten any simpler. Selm stood up. He put on his gloves. He said he was giving Caden a choice. Hand over the book voluntarily and leave, or wait for the awakening and face Vellum, who wouldn't speak, who would take the book and erase everyone Caden had rewritten, every caveat, every edit, every row. Lou, Ivy, Hazel, Clara, Tobias, Siona. Everything would return to the way it was. A laundress with a ceiling of 15, a thief with luck of 3, a knight with intelligence of 15, a boy with a health ceiling of 30, a slave trader. Everything will be reset to 0. Selm was gone. Caden sat in the empty archive. The candle was burning out. He held the book in his hands, warm, pulsating, and he thought, give it up or fight. If he gave it up, everything would go back to the way it was, to the life the registry had assigned them, to the cage they had already broken out of. If he didn't give it up, Vellum would wake up. And Caden didn't know what the first keeper was capable of. He didn't know his power. He didn't know his plan. He didn't know anything. He opened his a stain, black, impenetrable. He pressed his finger against it, harder than before. It hurt more. His fingernail turned white, and the stain shifted. Letters appeared for a second. 3 words. He read them. Kern Caden, draft, draft. He's not an approved entry. He's a draft. Like those edits he made in review mode. 24 hours free. Then approve or revert. He was Vellum's draft. He hadn't been cast here by chance. He had been written, like a caveat, like a footnote in a contract. Vellum had written him into this world as a draft. And after a certain amount of time, he would decide, approve or revert. Caden closed the book. He stood up. He blew out the candle, and went to the smithy. He knew what to do. 12 years of editing contracts. If you're a draft, you have 24 hours, or however long it takes, until it's approved. And during that time, you have to become something that can't be rejected, can't be erased, can't be rewritten. It has to become a text that stands on its own, not Vellum's draft, its own page. Caden arrived at the forge at dawn. Everyone was asleep. He sat down at the table. He placed the book in front of him. He opened it, and he began to write. No caveats, no edits, a letter. An ordinary letter on parchment in ordinary ink. Addressee, Archon Vellum, the basement of the Royal Library. He wrote, I know you wrote me. I know I'm a draft. I know you've been waiting 300 years. Come, I'll be in the archives. Tonight, alone. He rolled up the letter, opened the book, found a blank page. A page without a name. No numbers, no class. A page that was once the first. The one that Vellum had erased 300 years ago when he hid the book. Caden placed the letter on that page. The ink soaked into the parchment. The letters dissolved. They were gone, like a message in a bottle tossed into the ocean. Only the ocean was the registry, and the shore was a basement where an old man with an empty wrist slept. During the day, he worked as usual. He received visitors. He wrote petitions. Siona kept track of the numbers. Minna brought in scrolls. Leah read the visitors' records and quietly whispered to Caden what she saw. The baker's records were forged. The weaver's income was underreported. The messenger boy had a hidden talent for navigation that no one had noticed. Caden made corrections, with caveats, in small print, without a trace. That evening, he gathered the team. He told them everything about Vellum, about the draft, about how their edits might be erased, about how tonight he was going to the archives to meet the being who had written the first page of the register. Silence. Hazel was the first to speak. She said she was going with him. Caden shook his head. He said he had to go alone. Hazel slammed her fist on the table. She said she was his knight, that she had sworn an oath, that she wouldn't back down. Caden looked her in the eyes. He said this wasn't a battle with swords. It was a battle with letters, and he was the only one who could win it. Leah stood up. She walked over. She took his hands. She said quietly that she was going with him, not as a knight, not as a fighter, as the heiress of the pen. She could see the register. She can read what even a book cannot see. Caden looked at the quill on her wrist, at his own mark. He thought for a moment. Then he nodded. Night. The archive. The candles were extinguished. Moonlight streamed through a narrow window. Caden sat at the table. A book lay before him, open to a blank first page. Leah was beside him, silent. She gazed into the darkness. She saw lines that flickered in the air like fireflies. The entire register was trembling. She could feel it, like water trembling before a storm. The door opened. It didn't swing open. It opened slowly, quietly, like a page in a book. An old man stood in the doorway. Short, thin, a floor-length black cloak, an old face, ancient, but his eyes were young, bright, black as ink. In his right hand, a quill, black, long, slender, not a goose quill, made of a material Caden didn't recognize. His wrists were bare, not a single trace, not a single line, clean, as if he had never made a single correction in his life, or as if all his corrections had been erased. Archon Vellum. He entered. Each step was heavy, as if he weighed not 70 kilograms, but 700. And with every step, Caden felt the trace on his fist was fading, not disappearing, fading. The old man was erasing it, with his presence, with his breath, with the very fact that he existed in this room. Vellum sat down across from him. He looked at the book, at Caden, at Leah. His gaze lingered on Leah, on the mark on her wrist. His eyes flinched. Something flashed. Not surprise, recognition. He recognized the mark. He knew what it meant. He was silent for a minute. Then he spoke. His voice was dry, like the rustle of parchment. He said he had written Caden into this world 3 months ago, written him as a draft, as a test. He needed an editor, someone who knew how to work with caveats, someone who understood the difference between editing and forgery, someone who had been trained for 12 years at the keeper's office in Seoul and who didn't know he was being taught. Vellum said that 300 years ago, he wrote the register, the first page, the rules by which this world lives, ceilings, classes, limitations. He didn't write them out of malice, out of fear. The world was chaos. People with boundless power were destroying one another. The register was meant to be a framework, a restriction that would prevent the strong from destroying the weak. But the framework became a cage. The ceilings turned into sentences, classes into castes, restrictions into slavery. Vellum saw this. 200 years ago, he realized he had been wrong, that his system did not protect the weak. It made them weaker, and the strong stronger. He wanted to rewrite it, to erase the first page, to write a new one, but he couldn't, because an author cannot edit his own text. That is how the register works. The author writes, the editor revises. 2 different roles, 2 different hands. Vellum could do only one thing: find an editor, someone from another world, someone who knows how to edit other people's texts but has never written his own. Someone who spent 12 years correcting other people's words and spent his whole life afraid to write his own. Caden. Vellum looked at him. He waited. Caden listened and thought. He thought like an editor, not like a hero, not like a savior. Like a man who had spent his whole life reading other people's documents and spotting mistakes in them. He asked what Vellum wanted. Vellum said, "Rewrite the first page. Remove the ceilings, remove the classes, remove the restrictions. Make the registry what it was meant to be, not a cage, a mirror. Let it show what a person is, not what they're allowed to be." Caden stared at the blank first page, clean, white, waiting. He picked up a pen, not Vellum's pen, but his own, an ordinary one, an ink pen, from the archives, and he pondered. What to write? What words? What rules? What kind of world? He could write anything. A world without limits. A world without classes. A world where everyone is equal. A world where power is unlimited. But then he remembered Vellum, who wrote the perfect rules and ended up with slavery. He remembered Seoul, where perfect contracts gave rise to perfect inequality. He remembered every document he had drafted over the past 12 years, and every time it seemed the text was perfect, there was a single comma that turned everything upside down. He set down his pen, and he didn't write rules. He didn't write laws, not a constitution for a new world. He wrote a single line. Every sheet belongs to the one whose name is written on it. No one but the owner may set a ceiling. A single line. Not a perfect world, not a utopia. A single rule. Every person owns their own sheet, decides their own ceiling, decides their own class, decides their own. Kings and barons may rule the country, but not the sheets, not the limits, not the people. The page absorbed the ink. The letters glowed, brightly, dazzlingly. The whole book shook. Caden held it. Leah, standing nearby, closed her eyes and said what she saw. She saw sheets flaring up all over the city, how the ceilings are vanishing, how the words fake are being erased one by one, how Ivy, on the roof of the smithy, grabs his hand because her Luck 5 ceiling has just evaporated, how Tobias, in bed, takes a deep breath because the Health 60 ceiling has become just a number, not a sentence. How all across Astron, millions of sheets cease to be cells and become mirrors. Vellum watched, silently. On his face, Caden could read nothing, not joy, not sorrow, peace. The peace of a man who had waited 300 years for a single line, and had finally received it. The old man raised his hand. He showed Caden his wrist. empty, clean. Then he took out his inkwell, that very one, made of black stone, engraved with vellum, an exact replica of the one Caden had found in Clara's basement. He opened it. Inside was ink, black, thick, alive. He dipped his pen and wrote on the blank page next to Caden's line, Kern Caden, Keeper, second. Then, below that, Kern Leah, Keeper, third. The letters glowed and faded. Caden felt the ink stain on his page disappear, dissolve. Beneath it, text emerged, clean, new, his. Not a draft, an approved entry. He was no longer a draft in the vellum. He was the author of his own page. The vellum stood up. He put away the inkwell. He looked at Caden one last time. He said he was tired, that 300 years was a long time, even for a keeper, especially for one who had made a mistake on the very first page. He turned toward the door, and with every step away from them, his body became more transparent, lighter, quieter. He stopped at the threshold, turned around, looked at Leah, at the quill on her wrist, and said she looked like her mother. Then he stepped over the threshold and vanished. Not in a flash, not with a dramatic flourish. He simply ceased to be, like a word erased from parchment, gently, quietly, forever. Caden sat in the empty archive. The book lay before him. The first page was filled, one line of his, 2 lines by vellum, 3 lines instead of 1,000 rules. Leah sat beside him. She was crying quietly, not out of grief, out of something she couldn't name. She didn't know that vellum was her father, or her grandfather, or her creator, but she could feel it, because the heiress of the pen feels when the pen stops writing. Dawn, light streaming through the window, golden, warm. The first dawn of the new registry. Caden stood up. He picked up the book. He took Leah by the hand. They left the archive. The street was quiet. The city was still asleep. But Caden knew that when it woke up, it would be different. Not right away, not in a single day. The ceilings had disappeared, but the habits remained. The barons remained. The nobility remained. The church remained. People who had lived in cages for 30 years wouldn't step out of them in a single night. But the door was open. For the first time in 300 years, the door was open, and anyone who wanted to could step out. They reached the blacksmith's shop. The door was open. There was light inside. Everyone was on their feet. Hazel sat at the table, staring at her hands. Her mind was no longer dependent on the claws. The ceiling had vanished. She was intelligent in her own right. She always had been. Now the registry confirmed it. Ivy stood by the window, quiet for the first time. She sensed luck, not the +80 from the claws, her own, real luck, the kind that had been stolen from her when the record was forged. Now the forgery had been erased, her own luck. Shiona sat with the scrolls. She was counting, but not debts, opportunities. How many families could be reunited? How many confiscations could be reversed? How many people could be brought back from the mines? The numbers were huge, years' worth of work. Minna stood in the corner, a scroll pressed to her chest. She knew. She had always known. Memory 97. She remembered every document that mentioned vellum, every apocryphal text, every legend. And now the legend had become history. Clara was kneading dough. Tobias sat on the floor and drew, healthy, alive. He drew a feather, crooked but recognizable. Caden sat down at the table. He set down a book. He rested his hands on the table, ink-stained fingers, a callus on his middle finger, the slender hands of a scribe, the same hands he'd had on the very first day. Power 6 hadn't gone anywhere. He hadn't gotten stronger. He hadn't gotten faster. He hadn't gotten taller. He remained a scribe. But now he was a guardian, the second one. And seated around him were 6 women who had changed their sheets. He hadn't changed them. They had. He'd only written a note, in small print, in a column that no one reads. And after that, they did everything themselves. Leah sat down next to him. She rested her head on his shoulder. She said quietly that she could still see the lines, that they were beautiful, that now there were no ceilings in them, only names and numbers and empty columns that everyone will fill in for themselves. Caden placed his hand on the book, warm, pulsing, alive. His book, not Vellum's, his. He looked out the window. The sun was rising above the rooftops of a strain. A new day, a new register, an old scribe. Ahead lay barons who would not give up, a church that would fight, a king who needed answers, a rift in the east from which creatures were crawling out, and a whole world that needed not to be rewritten, but taught to write for itself. Caden picked up a quill. He dipped it in ink, and on a blank sheet of parchment, he wrote the first order of the new workshop. Not a correction, not an amendment, a proclamation. Kern the Keeper's Workshop, open to all. We do not rewrite people. We help them read themselves. He set down the quill. He looked at the team. 6 faces, 7 if you count Tobias. Each face was a story the world had tried to erase, and every story had survived. Not because a scribe had rewritten it, because they themselves had refused to be drafts. Clara set hot bread on the table. Ivy immediately grabbed a piece. Hazel gave her a light tap on the back of the head. Siona adjusted her glasses. Min-Ah smiled for the first time, openly, brightly, like someone who had finally read the last page of a book they'd started long ago. Leah lifted her head from Caden's shoulder. She looked at him. She said she liked the new sign, but Ivy would draw the feather crooked again. Caden laughed, for the first time in both his lives. For real. For 12 years, he'd been correcting other people's words, but he'd never written his own. Now he had. One line on the first page, and it changed the world.